Hello guys, welcome to Fanfiction Audiobook. Here you find original fan-made audio stories. Enjoy the journey into new worlds.
Greek mythology. I awakened as a divine prophet. Part 1. Who are you? Talon awoke from his slumber, looking at the two primordial gods before him who were examining him, his consciousness dazed for a moment. This was the first time Talon had seen a living creature other than himself in this world. Talon no longer remembered how long he had transmigrated, he only knew that he had always been in a vast expanse of chaos. Even he himself was merely a formless consciousness within chaos, without even a physical entity, forced to pass his time in endless slumber. The last time he had woken up was when this chaos, named chaos, had just begun to evolve from disorder to order, and those primordial gods were born. Chaos changed with their birth, matter was constructed, and the primordial order and authority they symbolized began to manifest. The whole world was finally no longer just chaos, but possessed land, the abyss, stars, darkness, and eros, which symbolized life. However, at that time, the primordial gods had just been born, the world had only just begun to evolve, and everything was too slow, so Talon fell into a deep sleep again, until now, when he was awakened by the two people before him. They were a man and a woman, the woman wore a green dress, and the man wore a blue robe. Their aura was vast and mysterious, seemingly carrying endless power, and their gaze towards Talon was both wary and curious. It was their first time seeing such a weak god, whose divine power was pitifully feeble, seemingly unable to even nurture a physical form, and they did not know what divine office he controlled. And Talon had already recognized the woman's identity, only because he had witnessed her birth with his own eyes. One of the primordial gods, the Mother Earth Gaia. She had once used mountains as bones, oceans as veins, forging the earth, water, air, and fire elements in chaos into a concrete earth, with the embryos of stars yet to hatch gestating in her chest. As for the man beside Gaia, Talon did not recognize him, only able to determine that he was not a primordial god. Because Talon had only witnessed the birth of the major primordial gods, and after confirming that the world had begun to evolve, he had fallen into a deep sleep again, he naturally did not know about the gods born after the primordial gods. However, seeing their intimate behavior at this moment, Talon guessed that their relationship was extraordinary. We are speaking to you. The man frowned, a hint of dissatisfaction appearing on his young face. What is your name, and what divine office do you control? Uranus, do not be rude. Gaia softly interrupted the man's aggressiveness, her gaze fixed on the void before her, sensing the unknown existence who possessed consciousness without a physical form. Gaia did not look down on Talon because he was too weak, only because she had sensed his gaze at the beginning of her birth, knowing that this was an existence born earlier than her. She was just a bit curious why such an ancient existence would be so weak, and also curious about who he really was and what divine authority he controlled, which was why she had come to probe when passing by here with Uranus. Uranus, Gaia's child, and also the first-generation god king who was Gaia's husband, Uranus. Talon immediately understood the man's identity, his emotions churning within. As the first conscious creature in this world, Talon had been waiting for this day for too long, he didn't even know how long he had been waiting. Perhaps because of his transmigrated soul, he was not accepted by this world, unable to even nurture his own body. Moreover, he had come too early, so early that there was nothing in chaos, not even the sky and the earth. In the entire chaos, there was only his lonely spirit, so he could do nothing but sleep. But it was also because he had come early enough, coupled with his original memories being quite clear about the future evolution of the entire world and the things that would happen, which affected the evolving chaos, and thus he had also obtained a divine office. That was fate. The things he knew would inevitably happen, could not be resisted or resolved, and even he himself could not change them. He only saw what would happen in advance, and everything was destined. And all the prophecies about fate he spoke would eventually come true, so he was also the god of prophecy, because prophecy was inherently subordinate to fate. The only thing that puzzled Talon was that the divine office of fate could definitely not be considered weak, but his divine power was indeed pitifully weak, not even comparable to a single hair of these primordial gods. However, previously, as these primordial gods were born, the fate symbolizing them began to move, and Talon could clearly feel that his divine power, which had been silent for an unknown amount of time, had also begun to change, growing at an extremely slow speed. Although in front of those primordial gods who symbolized power and invincibility from birth, this bit of divine power growth was like a firefly to the bright moon, a water droplet to the vast ocean, but at least it had finally changed, even if it was still pitifully weak. The only benefit was probably that Talon himself symbolized fate, and fate always existed, so Talon would never perish, right? Unless this world was completely destroyed, fate would not cease to exist along with it. Talon had long been intertwined with this world. Talon guessed that perhaps only as there were more lives in this world, and more fates symbolizing these individuals, would he become stronger. In other words, the more prosperous this world was, the stronger he would be. And he was so weak now because the world was still barren, with only a few gods, and even the fate of these few had only just begun to turn. If he wanted to gain more powerful divine power, he had to push the development of these gods' fates. Thinking of this, Talon was no longer silent. Without a physical body, he transmitted his voice with his consciousness. Uranus and Gaia only felt a distant and vague voice resound in their minds, neither male nor female, neither happy nor angry, as if separated by an indescribable layer of fog. That voice said, "I am the god of prophecy, and I can glimpse fate." Uranus and Gaia looked at each other, their eyes full of suspicion and disbelief. They simply could not imagine how this weak god before them, who could not even condense a physical form, could glimpse fate with his feeble divine power. Under Gaia's signal, the young Uranus did not say he believed or did not believe. He suppressed the disdain in his eyes and just asked, "Then, respected your highness, what have you seen? You, Uranus, king of the sky, will become the god king of this world." Talon spoke again, his voice devoid of any emotion, merely stating facts calmly. "And you, Mother Earth Gaia, will become the god queen of this world. You will become the masters of this world, together nurturing divine descendants. In the near future, you will give birth to 12 children at once. They are the embodiment of laws and also a sign of a more complete world." Once these words were spoken, Uranus and Gaia both fell into a long silence. They were clearly shocked by the bold statement of this unknown existence. "Respected your highness, thank you for your prophecy. If it is truly as you say, then we would feel very honored, but please understand, because this is truly too unbelievable, and we find it hard to believe." This time, it was Gaia who spoke, and what was revealed in her words was still distrust. Talon was simply too weak in their eyes. They did not believe that such a weak existence could actually see fate, especially such a magnificent and unbelievable fate. Talon, however, did not care about Gaia and Uranus's reaction and attitude. He just chuckled lightly and said in a low voice, "Then why don't we make a bet? If it is truly as I said, you will agree to one condition for me, and vice versa." Uranus and Gaia looked at each other, and finally, Uranus nodded, agreeing to this bet. From beginning to end, Talon was so calm and confident, only because the moment he spoke just now, he felt the growth of divine power within him, which meant the fate belonging to the two people before him had already begun to turn. "King of the gods," young Uranus whispered these two words, his once calm heart becoming a blaze of heat. But immediately after, he felt some confusion, asking as if murmuring to himself, "But how can I become the king of the gods? My dear Uranus, you are the most heroic god in the world, regardless of whether you are the king of the gods or not." Gaia gently consoled this still young deity, the feminine radiance upon her reaching its peak at this moment. It was a tenderness sufficient to encompass everything in the world. Uranus looked at Gaia, infected by her tenderness, and lowered his body, as if the entire sky were descending. At this moment, heaven and earth merged once again, inseparable, and the world returned to a state of chaos. And in this dimness, a woman draped in black robes arrived at Talon's location. She slightly raised her head, revealing a face completely shrouded in the night, impossible to discern clearly. However, judging by the silhouette beneath the black robes, she was an extremely voluptuous woman. Talon was awakened by her arrival and simultaneously recognized her identity. One of the primordial gods born together with Erebus, the goddess of night, Nyx. This pair of twins born together, Erebus and Nyx, the former was solidified pure black, the latter was flowing darkness. Erebus brought down the silence of eternal night, and wherever Nyx's skirt brushed, the trajectories of the stars began to flicker. The birth of this brother and sister gave chaos the concept of time. The alternation between darkness and light quietly brewed within their breaths, and the lightning that burst forth when the two intertwined carved the first crack into the void, becoming the prototype of the future galaxy. Another powerful primordial god. Talon thought helplessly in his heart, feeling the other's powerful aura, and felt his own weakness all the more. If the divine power of the primordial gods was at level 10, his current state probably couldn't even reach level 1. He was even significantly weaker than the new gods born from these primordial gods. Just like Gaia, when the other primordial gods were born, they had all sensed Talon's presence and gaze. It was just that, except for Gaia, the other deities were basically formless and shapeless, and without too many complex emotions, they were not interested in Talon. Therefore, Talon felt strange about Nyx's visit. He thought about it and spoke with his consciousness. "Respected Lady Night, is there something you need by coming to find me?" Nyx sized up the formless and shapeless unknown existence before her, nodded, and said in a voice that was ethereal and hollow, yet devoid of any emotion, I have children I cannot give birth to. Talon's mouth twitched. He never expected such a reason. Why are you coming to me if you can't give birth to children? I don't know how to deliver babies, and I don't even have a physical body. In his memories, Nyx did indeed give birth to many children. Some were born together with Erebus, and some were conceived alone. Each child symbolized a law, and every time a law was born, it meant the world became one part more complete. Among them, the most famous was the goddess of day, Hemera, who dispersed the night every day, forming a day-night cycle with her mother, from which the world finally had the concept of day and night. And rather than saying Nyx was conceiving offspring, it was more like she was responding to the needs of the world, conceiving new laws that the world required, what is known as conception through sensing heaven. So what is this situation of not being able to give birth? Most importantly, why come to him because she can't give birth? As if seeing through Talon's confusion, Nyx spoke again with her ethereal, calm voice. It is because of you. Talon was even more bewildered now. Nyx said she couldn't give birth because of him. What did he do that he didn't know about? Facing Nyx's expressionless gaze, Talon had to use his meager divine power to examine the cause and effect within this. It turned out that because of his arrival, he had occupied the divinity of fate, and thus the world no longer needed a new god of fate. But Nyx's children were fated, which also belonged to fate, and this included the famous the three fates. The three fates Moirai, respectively. Clotho, the weaver who spins the thread of life. Lachesis, the decider of the length of the thread of life. Atropos, the cutter of the thread of life. The three goddesses constituted a complete closed loop of the cycle of fate. Their existence made humans struggle within the yarn of inevitability, perhaps deviating from the trajectory, but never escaping. But now, because of Talon's appearance, the three fates, who were destined to be born, lost the divine authority they should have had. By all logic, they should have directly vanished, as the world no longer needed them. Yet they had already been conceived, so this awkward event of not being able to give birth occurred. Looking at it this way, it really seemed to be because of him. Nyx was essentially the aggrieved party coming to demand an explanation. Talon felt a bit awkward. He thought for a moment and said tentatively, Your Highness Nyx, I deeply sympathize with your plight. Since it is a lack of source causing the inability to be born, perhaps I can try. Nyx nodded. Currently, she had very little personification and almost no emotional fluctuations. Having obtained Nyx's consent, Talon tentatively wrapped a wisp of the source representing fate with his meager divine power and covered Nyx with it. The next moment, he sensed something. The humming of laws sounded, as if the entire world were trembling. In the void, invisible threads of fate intertwined, and in the center of those threads, three beautiful figures appeared. Those figures were full and voluptuous, their postures graceful and lithe, and beneath the thin, form-fitting clothing were perfect feminine curves. Their features were even more exquisite and beautiful, seemingly radiating vibrant vitality. Clotho, Lachesis, Atropos, greet Father God and Mother Goddess. The three sisters spoke simultaneously, their voices light and pleasant. They did not show the slightest disrespect because of Talon's weakness, because they could feel the fated aura upon him. Nyx was neither happy nor surprised by their birth, having almost no emotion. Just as she was preparing to leave, she suddenly sensed something and looked at the void where Talon was located. The originally formless and shapeless space suddenly began to fluctuate. More invisible, mysterious threads appeared, weaving together a young figure. It was a man, a handsome and young man. His features were soft, he was draped in white robes, and a pair of purple eyes seemed to be able to see through everything, though at this moment, they held a few traces of astonishment. I have a human form. Talon discovered with some pleasant surprise that he seemed to have escaped his formless and shapeless state. The reason seemed to be the birth of the three fates. Because of their appearance, Talon's divine power had surged again. No, not just that. Talon quickly sensed something and looked toward the distant source sea, which was still fluctuating non-stop, and had a deduction in his heart. The 12 titans are about to be born. At the same time, he had an epiphany. Letting fate happen on its own did not seem to yield as much divine power as when it happened under his promotion. Perhaps it was because a prophecy only counted as a prophecy if people knew about it. Just thinking about it himself didn't count, so he had to communicate with other deities. Then, if he wanted to become stronger quickly, wouldn't he have to personally push forward the things that were destined to happen? In this world, even gods have distinctions of strength. According to Talon's classification, they are divided into weak divine power, lesser divine power, intermediate divine power, greater divine power, and supreme creation divine power. At this moment, Talon is undoubtedly of weak divine power, while primordial gods like Gaia and Nyx are higher than greater divine power, though they have not yet reached the power of creation. As for the god of the sky Uranus, the god of the sea Pontus, the three fates, and others, these deities born from primordial gods like Gaia and Nyx are born with intermediate divine power, but through growth and the evolution of the world, they can attain greater divine power. The so-called power of creation is possessed only by chaos, the world itself. For a deity to reach this level, they must obtain the recognition of the world, which is what is known as His Majesty the God King. Aside from those few primordial gods with little personification, probably no one would remain indifferent to the position of His Majesty the God King. It is the magnificent power of creation, the absolute strength and authority. Uranus felt the same burning desire, especially after hearing that prophecy, even though the one who gave the prophecy was a weak deity he looked down upon. However, he did not know how to become His Majesty the God King, nor did he know how to obtain the world's recognition. Until his 12 children with Gaia were born. The laws of the world hummed as new orders were born one after another: ocean, light, memory, justice, harvest, time. There were 12 new laws in total, symbolizing 12 newborn deities, 6 male and 6 female. It was because of their birth that the evolving world became increasingly complete. In the instant they were born, Uranus felt the will of the world. He obtained the great patriarchy, and his divine power surged and soared instantly. At this moment, Uranus finally understood why the prophecy linked His Majesty the God King to the birth of his 12 children. The newborn gods were all his children, so he was naturally the king of gods, and the world automatically placed the crown upon him. Yet he could not fathom how such a weak deity could glimpse fate. But the facts were laid out before him, forcing him to believe that, at the very least, he had lost the bet between them. He looked at his wife Gaia, who had just given birth, and saw that her eyes were filled with the same incredulous complexity. Perhaps we should go and see that venerable highness again, Gaia said, taking the initiative. To apologize for our previous offense and to fulfill our side of the bet. He truly did foresee the birth of our children, as well as your position as His Majesty the God King and mine as God Queen. This ability is astonishing. Let him come to attend our banquet, Uranus said after thinking for a moment. We can properly thank him at the banquet. That is well, such a special day should be properly celebrated, Gaia agreed. I will go and invite him personally. It will be fitting to have him witness this great moment. My beautiful God Queen, you are so understanding. Uranus looked at Gaia tenderly, the two of them filled with intimacy. The newborn deities did not know what had happened. Under the influence of the patriarchy, they dared not even ask Uranus, each of them mumbling and afraid to speak. But this did not prevent them from guessing what their father god and mother god were talking about. It seemed someone had foreseen their birth in advance, and had even foreseen Uranus and Gaia's positions as His Majesty the God King and God Queen. What kind of magnificent power was this? And what kind of powerful existence was that? But when Talon was led up to the sacred mountain by Gaia, they discovered that they had overthought it, and were instantly filled with immense disappointment. Because this deity was too weak. So weak that it seemed even they, as newborns, could easily defeat him, so weak that his body, materialized from laws, did not even seem solid. Could such a deity actually glimpse fate? It was truly unbelievable. No wonder Father God and Mother God did not believe his words back then. However, prophecy itself did not seem to be a powerful divine office, so being a bit weak was understandable. The gods thought this to themselves, continuing to observe silently, not daring to speak without permission. I pay my respects to you, His Majesty the God King. Talon bowed slightly, expressing his respect to the male god sitting high on the dais, while Gaia came to Uranus's side and stood quietly beside him. We meet again, respected seer, god of prophecy, Uranus said with a smile. Compared to the last time, his voice was now filled with majesty, symbolizing supreme divine power. Forgive our previous presumption. Fate is truly an unfathomable thing. Before it happens, no one can imagine that it will occur, not even I can judge it. Compared to their last meeting, Uranus was much more polite this time. Even though he was more powerful now than when they had last met, he had also witnessed the power of prophecy. Talon smiled indifferently. He was in a very good mood now because his divine power had grown and he had gained a physical form, which made him even more determined to push fate forward. He was not yet completely recognized by this world. This might be Chaos's rejection of an outsider soul, which left his body somewhat illusory, but on some level, His Majesty the God King represented the will of the world. If this world did not recognize him, then he would just have His Majesty the God King recognize him instead. His Majesty the God King need not mind. It is my honor to be able to witness the birth of the first generation God King of Chaos with my own eyes, Talon said sincerely. Your appearance is the choice of the world. And I have merely glimpsed a corner of fate. The first generation God King. Gaia, having keenly caught the keyword, frowned slightly, and Uranus's eyes darkened even more. The 12 newborn deities also sensed something, and all felt somewhat uneasy. And Talon, as if he hadn't noticed their reaction, continued to praise earnestly. You are so great, the world is more prosperous because of your existence. Highness Talon. Uranus spoke, interrupting his praise. Regarding the previous bet, we are willing to admit defeat, so I will grant you one condition. Have you thought about what you want? Seeing Talon reveal a thoughtful expression, Uranus spoke as if unintentionally. If you haven't thought of it yet, perhaps you can wait. I would like to ask you for another prophecy. If you are willing, the condition can be proposed later. In this way, I will grant you the greatest leniency and agree to any condition I am capable of fulfilling. The corners of Talon's mouth curled up slightly. He knew the other party had taken the bait, but he still pretended to be troubled, thinking earnestly for a long while before nodding. It is my honor, His Majesty the God King. What would you like to know? Wise seer, I hope you can tell me, in the future of this world, am I the eternal God King? Uranus looked at Talon and asked, enunciating each word, will I rule this world forever? As soon as these words were spoken, the entire palace fell silent. A look of worry appeared on Gaia's face, while the newborn deities all turned their eyes in unison toward Talon, their expressions varied. Because this was a death trap of a question. On the towering sacred mountain, pairs of eyes watched Talon, each with different expressions. Every one of them had heard Talon's previous mention of the first generation God King, and their hearts were all stirred. To have one implies there will be a second. Did this mean that the noble lord of all gods, the king of the sky, Uranus, was not the eternal ruler? It was under the influence of these words that Uranus chose to directly ask about the prophecy. Even though he still felt that Talon was weak and insignificant in his heart, as long as he cared about his position as God King, he could not help but ask. And this was precisely what Talon had been expecting to see. A so-called prophecy can only be considered a prophecy if others know about it. So-called fate is only destined if others know of it. Talon seemed oblivious to the complex gazes of the gods. He looked at Uranus, his tone humble and polite. Your Majesty the God King, there is actually no need for you to concern yourself with these things. You are so great, and this world has become prosperous because of you. You are the undisputed God King. Talon first sincerely praised Uranus, and seeing that the other remained unmoved, he shifted his tone and said in a low voice. But you must know, there is nothing in this world that is eternal. The world and time will have an end, and so will the gods. Uranus's furrowed brows relaxed slightly, because these words did not sound like a prophecy, which lessened the sense of crisis in his heart. At this moment, Uranus had just acquired the powerful divine authority of patriarchy and had gained the recognition of the world, reaching a Genesis great power that rivaled or even surpassed the primordial gods. It was a moment of unprecedented strength for him. This surging power made him feel that there was nothing in this world that could not be changed. Even if the world truly reached its end, he could forcibly reverse it, because he indeed possessed the power of creation. However, this did not seem to explain the phrasing of first generation God King. Respected God of prophecy, I wish to know my fate, Uranus said. Will there be other God Kings after me? Talon immediately wore a troubled expression. His attempt to change the subject so obviously failed, and he deliberated before advising. Your Majesty the God King, sometimes knowing the future is not a good thing. Perhaps it would be better not to know. Lord Talon, you only need to tell me what you have seen. There is no need to worry about anything else. Uranus remained completely unmoved. Seeing this, Talon sighed, looking both helpless and regretful. Since that is the case, then as you wish, Your Majesty the God King. You will rule this world for an era, but your position as God King will eventually be replaced by your child. Talon looked at Uranus, calmly but firmly enunciating each word. Kingship is not eternal. As soon as these words were spoken, the entire divine palace fell into deathly silence. The newborn 12 titans all changed expressions, and flames of anger appeared in Gaia's eyes as she glared fiercely at Talon. Gaia knew all too well what kind of challenge these words posed to the relationship between father and son. At this moment, she felt intense dissatisfaction toward Talon. If not for Uranus's presence, she would have attacked on the spot. Among all the gods, the calmest one was actually the protagonist of the prophecy, Uranus. There was no unusual expression on this great God King's face, no anger, no surprise, only an unfathomable, calm stillness. It was precisely because of his non-committal attitude that the 12 titans and Gaia, even with their emotions churning violently, dared not act rashly. Lord Talon, is there anything else to the prophecy? Uranus asked calmly, as if he didn't care at all about the treasonous words Talon had just spoken. Your child will eventually wield a blade against you, with the help of his kin. Talon finished seriously, then bowed slightly and said respectfully, Your Majesty the God King, this is all that I can see. I am truly sorry, because my own divine power is weak, I can only see this much. He subtly pointed out that he had only seen a corner of fate and was merely relaying it, not creating it. Uranus nodded, accepting his words, for Talon's weakness was visible to the naked eye. Then, Lord Talon, what is your request? He did not ask about the prophecy again, as if Talon had just spoken some trivial words, and this indifferent attitude of his stemmed from absolute confidence in his own strength. Just as Talon had anticipated. Uranus, who had just been recognized by the world and achieved the position of God King, possessed Genesis' great power at this moment. It was no exaggeration to say he feared no challenge. If the opponent in Talon's prophecy were other primordial gods, Uranus might have worried, but to say it was his child. Uranus only found it absurd. The 12 Titans had just been born, but they were already of medium divine power. After future growth, they might become beings with great divine power, but that would be their limit. With them like this, Uranus even felt that even all of them combined were not worthy of being his opponents. Thus, this prophecy instantly became laughable, but seeing that the one who made the prophecy was such a weak deity, he felt it was understandable. For a moment, he even felt ridiculous himself for having believed some of this weak deity's prophecy before. Although everything he said at their first meeting had come true, it was only once, which proved nothing. He completely set his mind at ease, not even bothering to fuss over the offensive implications contained in Talon's prophecy, feeling that it would be beneath him to care. He prepared to fulfill his promise, agree to one reasonable condition, and then send the person away. Having such a weak fellow on his sacred mountain made him feel like it was an eyesore just thinking about it. Thank you for your generosity, Your Majesty the God King. Talon showed a joyful expression, and this undisguised look made Uranus feel even more disdainful, though he did not show it on his face. I want you to recognize my divine office in your capacity as God King. Talon said somewhat embarrassedly. I am too weak, my body, materialized from my divine office, cannot even solidify. If you, as the God King, are willing to recognize it, then my divine office should finally be considered completely stabilized. As soon as these words were spoken, not only Uranus, but even the newborn 12 Titans showed expressions of disdain. Although they knew Talon was weak, they hadn't expected him to be this weak. Uranus found it increasingly amusing in his heart, but not because he was laughing at Talon's weakness. Talon was not worthy of provoking his emotions. He was laughing at himself, laughing that for such an important divine banquet, he had actually solemnly invited such a fellow. But this request was too simple for him, so he had no reason to refuse. Moreover, it was just a divine office of prophecy, not an important position, so even if he recognized it, there would be no hidden dangers. He nodded calmly, and Uranus's majestic voice resounded throughout the entire divine palace, with strange fluctuations connecting to the whole world. I, Uranus, with the position of God King, recognize Lord Talon's divine office. A sincere smile instantly appeared on Talon's face. His originally illusory body solidified in an instant, and even his inner divine power surged significantly. The power of fate he had originally mastered became increasingly clear and even more inseparable. The chaos world, which had always rejected him, finally accepted him completely at this moment. Bowing slightly, Talon thanked him sincerely. Thank you for your help, Your Majesty the God King. You truly are a generous God King. Talon took the initiative to request to leave the sacred mountain. Although Uranus made a show of feigning reluctance to let him go, once Talon insisted, he was happy to go with the flow and had Gaia escort him away, even though the divine banquet had only just begun. Compared to the harmony when he arrived, the atmosphere upon his departure was filled with much more oppression, which was clearly due to Talon's prophecy. Because of his absolute confidence in his own strength, Uranus displayed unexpected magnanimity, but Gaia was not happy. Whether it was the husband she deeply loved or the children she cherished, they were all important to her, and this prophecy of Talon's would clearly affect the relationship between them, which was something Gaia absolutely did not want to see. Therefore, this Mother Earth, who was always known for her gentleness, had a cold face at this moment, her entire being radiating the mighty pressure of the primordial gods. This was very unfriendly for a god with weak divine power like Talon, so when they arrived, Gaia had carefully restrained her aura, but now, she made no effort to hide her dissatisfaction with Talon. Lord Talon, do you know what kind of impact your prophecy will have on the father and his children? They should have lived in harmony. Noble Mother Earth, I did not wish to make such a prophecy either, but I could not refuse the request of His Majesty the God King. Talon sighed, his tone helpless and his expression troubled. I could only report what I saw truthfully. After all, the great divine power of His Majesty the God King is not something we can resist. Although Gaia was displeased, she knew that Talon was speaking the truth. She had seen him try to decline repeatedly in the temple, but Uranus had insisted, and there was nothing he could do. Surely one couldn't expect a god as weak as him to defy the God King's orders, or to fabricate pleasant lies to deceive the God King. Whichever method he chose, it was unlikely that Uranus would let Talon off the hook. Knowing this was one thing, but the gloom in Gaia's heart could not be dissipated. She took a deep breath, tried her best to suppress her emotions, and asked again. Then, Lord Talon, will this prophecy really come to pass? Is there any way to avoid it? I would very much like to answer your question, noble Earth Mother, great God Queen, but I am simply too weak. I only spoke of what I saw, I cannot interpret it. Therefore, I do not know if it will happen. Very well. Gaia withdrew her gaze in disappointment and said no more, pondering what to do about the future and how to resolve the impact brought by this prophecy. In the end, she did not vent her anger on Talon, because there was no need, and also because of the kindness of Mother Earth. She escorted Talon back to that endless void, but just as she was about to leave and return, Talon suddenly spoke up. Lady Gaia, if one day you have other thoughts, you can come to find me again. At that time, perhaps I can help ease your worries. The corners of Gaia's mouth twitched, as if she wanted to force a smile, but in the end, she failed to do so. Although she felt in her heart that Talon was too weak to be of any help, she still nodded politely and replied perfunctorily, Very well, thank you for your kindness, Lord Talon. Having said that, she did not linger any longer and hurried back to the sacred mountain. Upon returning, she felt the atmosphere that was so quiet it had almost solidified. The 12 titans were all bowing their heads, displaying their obedience and submission, not daring to make the slightest movement, while Uranus calmly scrutinized them, observing their every move. Uranus, who symbolized patriarchal power, possessed absolute suppression over his children. This suppression was not only in terms of divine power, but also in terms of status. Facing this powerful father, the 12 titans were both in awe and afraid, and it was entirely instinctive, like mice seeing a cat. And this timid and cowardly display made Uranus feel increasingly disdainful. He did not believe at all that they had the ability to overthrow him. As for help from relatives, Uranus's gaze turned to the distant horizon, where the sea lay. Pontus, the sea god and another deity Gaia had conceived alone, was there. This deity, who also possessed great divine power, was even more powerful and threatening than his children. Before he became the God King, he had been of the same status as him. But now that he was the God King, the divine power of Pontus instantly became insignificant, and still could not threaten him. Thinking of this, he completely relaxed in his heart, but he did not show it on his face at all. His gaze as he swept across his children remained full of oppression. When Gaia returned and saw this scene, she was immediately filled with worry for the future of her children. She thought for a moment, then took the initiative to go to Uranus's side and said softly in a gentle voice, Uranus, my beloved, perhaps the truth is not as we imagined. Lord Talon's abilities are too lacking, and what he said is unlikely to be true. Perhaps we should go and ask a more noble existence. Deep down, she still had a glimmer of hope, preferring to believe that the prophecy was inaccurate because Talon was too weak. Uranus became interested and responded patiently, Gaia, my god queen, who do you think we should ask? Just a short while ago, the noble goddess of night, Lady Nyx, gave birth to the destined the three fates. They are the observers of fate, perhaps they will know more. The three fates. Uranus's eyes flickered. When these three were born, the heaven and earth had also undergone strange changes, which meant they possessed a powerful divine office. Although they were only observers of fate, as long as one was involved with fate, their power was unquestionable. Moreover, no one could control fate, and even the observers of fate were far more powerful than the so-called divine office of prophecy. It would not be an exaggeration to say that they were worlds apart. After all, prophecy was merely a subordinate branch of fate, not to mention that Talon was so weak that he seemed unable to even fully control the divine office of prophecy, requiring recognition from him, the God King. Looking at it this way, asking Talon for a prophecy was indeed a wrong decision. Perhaps he should have gone to ask the three fates from the beginning. No, that's not right, he shouldn't have cared about every word that weak fellow said at all, then there would be no need to ask these questions. Uranus mused to himself, but he still nodded and said to Gaia, who was looking at him with concern, Then, after the divine banquet ends, we will go and visit those three respectable goddesses of fate. Only then did Gaia reveal a relieved smile, but the next moment, Uranus gently pushed away her body as she snuggled up to him and said gently but firmly, "Now, I think it is necessary to teach the children how to conduct themselves properly and fulfill their divine office." Gaia's smile immediately froze on her face. Rooted in the power of his own divine strength, Uranus did not believe Talon's prophecy, nor did he think these children had the ability to overthrow him. However, this did not stop him from using it as an excuse to vent his dissatisfaction. In his eyes, Talon's prophecy was simply an offense. As a proud god king, it was impossible for him to be pleased. Yet, it was he who had demanded the prophecy, and Talon was far too weak. Making a fuss about it would be truly embarrassing, so Uranus could only be magnanimous. But the 12 titans were different. These were his children and his subordinates. Whether in the name of a father or the name of the god king, he had ample reason to admonish them. In stark contrast to the benevolent Mother Earth Gaia, Uranus did not think there was anything wrong with taking his anger out on the innocent. He was the god king, the master of this world. Every living being in this world should naturally conform to his will. Since he was currently somewhat unhappy, these gods should sacrifice themselves for his amusement. This was their duty and their honor. The Genesis great power from the God King erupted without reservation. The 12 titans felt as if their very souls were being torn apart. The terrifying pressure made it impossible for them to even breathe. Their spirits and bodies were ravaged simultaneously, terrifying the newborns to the extreme. One after another, they knelt on the ground, trembling and groveling, begging for the God King to appease his anger and grant them forgiveness, even though they did not know what they had done wrong. Uranus looked at their pathetic state, his eyes full of disdain, and even his tone carried a hint of mockery. Is this how you act as gods? Prostrating on the ground, utterly shameless. To think I sired such children, you make me feel ashamed. In his heart, he felt the prophecy was increasingly absurd. These worthless fellows before him would actually raise a blade against him and overthrow him in the prophecy. It was simply an insult to him. Feeling dissatisfied, Uranus became even more unrestrained in releasing the God King's great power, while slowly and methodically lecturing them on what a god should do. He told them how to fulfill their divine duties, how to develop the world, and most importantly, to absolutely obey his commands as the God King. While he spoke, the 12 new gods remained prostrated on the ground, enduring the double torture of body and spirit, trembling in pain. They did not even dare to make a sound, fearing it would bring even heavier punishment from the God King, and could only suffer in silence. Uranus admired this scene, his tone becoming increasingly leisurely. He was deliberately using this method to beat down his children, preventing them from ever harboring a single thought of rebellion. Time passed bit by bit. After an unknown amount of time, seeing the children wailing and begging for mercy because they could no longer endure it, Gaia finally could not bear it and tried to stop Uranus. Great God King, my sincerest love, they are your children, not your enemies. Why must you treat them in such a cruel manner? The always gentle and soft Mother Earth issued a question at this moment. This was the first time she and Uranus had disagreed since they had been together, and the first time she disapproved of his actions. Sensing the change in Gaia's emotions, Uranus finally withdrew his divine power with lingering interest, ending this long beating. He smiled and soothed Gaia, as if all of this were a trivial matter not worth much concern. My beloved God Queen, it is about time. Let us go visit the three fates. Gaia was still somewhat dissatisfied, but looking at Uranus before her, her beloved, those grievances were ultimately suppressed. She nodded and said no more. The 12 new gods, now completely exhausted, wore expressions of joy as if they had survived a disaster. When this emotion appeared uncontrollably on their faces, Uranus found it laughable. Before leaving, he looked at his children and said in a voice full of sarcasm and mockery, my well-behaved children, you truly make me feel at ease. To reward your obedience, I have decided to grant you the title of Titans. From now on, you are the 12 Titans. Titan meant, the fearful, or, the strained. Uranus was mocking his 12 children for their pathetic performance before him, implying they were 12 cowards. Uranus was the God King recognized by the world. The moment he bestowed the title, it was set in stone, with no possibility of change. This was an extremely humiliating matter. For grand gods to be given the title of cowards, the 12 titans could not bear such an insult. But looking at Uranus's majestic figure and feeling his powerful divine strength, they had to endure it, unable to summon even a hint of resistance. Gaia was dissatisfied but helpless. She could only place her hopes on the goddesses of fate, hoping they could provide a different prophecy to improve Uranus's attitude toward the children. They reached the end of the world, crossed the gray-black storms, and saw the divine mountain where the goddesses of fate resided, meeting the three goddesses upon it. In the vast palace, three beautiful young girls were handling the threads that were the embodiment of fate. The divinity radiating from them was powerful and unique, revealing an indescribable aura of mystery everywhere. Although their divine power did not equal that of God King Uranus and Mother Earth Gaia, it already surpassed the 12 titans. One must realize that both sides were newborn gods, yet a gap already existed. To be so powerful at birth, they were truly worthy of being the deities who managed parts of fate's trajectory, birthed by the goddess of night. Indeed, this was how a prophet should look, powerful and mysterious, unlike some weak fellow who couldn't even stabilize his divine position. Respected the three fates, please forgive our unannounced intrusion. Gaia spoke first, remaining gentle and polite. The purpose of our visit is to inquire about our destiny and to know the prophecies regarding the future. She glanced at Uranus beside her, gritted her teeth, and finally asked, "We also wish to know if my beloved Uranus will be the eternal God King." Great God King, God Queen, forgive us for being unable to answer this question. The three goddesses spoke simultaneously, their voices merging and echoing throughout the temple like the ringing of wind chimes. Why? Noble goddesses, do you feel our arrival was too abrupt? Gaia pressed. No, it is because we have only just been born and are still too weak to glimpse the outline of fate, said Clotho, the eldest of the three sisters. Perhaps in some time, once we have grown stronger, we will be able to glimpse a sliver of fate's outline, Lachesis, the second sister, added. And at that time, if you still wish to know, you may come and ask us again, Atropos, the youngest goddess, concluded. Uranus and Gaia were somewhat disappointed, but they had expected this. After all, how could fate be so easily glimpsed, especially the fate of a god king? However, if things that even the powerful the three fates could not glimpse, how could that weak god of prophecy, Talon, possibly see them? It seemed this prophecy was indeed inaccurate. Thinking this, Uranus finally felt completely at ease. Uranus did not receive the prophecy he desired. He returned to his divine mountain, having already banished the 12 titans, sending them off to fulfill their respective divine offices. At this time, the world was still desolate, with almost no living beings. The number of gods was far too few compared to the vastness of the world, which was still in the process of evolution. In the blink of an eye, over 1,000 years passed. And atop that towering divine mountain, a fierce argument broke out once again. Uranus, you shouldn't treat them this way, they are your children too. Gaia pleaded bitterly, while before her knelt three massive giants, each possessing only a single eye. This was not their first argument. Ever since these three Cyclops were born, Uranus and Gaia had frequently clashed. No matter how Gaia begged, Uranus simply could not accept these three misshapen children. No, they are all defective monsters. It is impossible for me to sire such abominable creatures, Uranus said coldly. Ever since that prophecy in the temple, Uranus had found his 12 Titan children disagreeable in every possible way. It was a contradictory mindset. He did not believe the prophecy and didn't think these useless fellows could overthrow him, yet he felt it was a disgrace to have sired such useless beings. Gradually, as Uranus watched these cowardly beings grovel and tremble under his divine might, he began to feel a subtle sense of satisfaction. The feeling of having everything under his control made him feel at ease. Thus, he sought every means to torment the 12 titans for his own amusement, which became one of the few meager pleasures in his long divine life. The 12 titans suffered immensely under his torture. Every time, they would seek help from the merciful Earth Mother, Gaia, who would then step forward to persuade him. To give the God Queen face, Uranus would restrain himself for a few days. But it was only for a few days. During this time, with nowhere to vent, Uranus would make the sky and earth press tightly together, frantically demanding Gaia's power. Gaia felt the pain as well, but to give her children a moment to breathe, she could only endure it alone. Perhaps because their love had dissipated, or perhaps because of the rift in their hearts, Gaia gave birth to 3 children who were starkly different from the natural-born gods that were the 12 titans, the Cyclops. These 3 children were hideously ugly from birth and possessed no godhead. They were not gods recognized by the world. Yet, they possessed formidable divine power, even exceeding that of the 12 titans when they were newborns. One must know that the 12 titans were born with medium divine power, and after so many years of growth, they had already reached great divine power. Yet these 3 monsters surpassed medium divine power the moment they were born. Although they hadn't quite reached great divine power yet, what if they were given a little more time? What if they were allowed to grow further? This discovery made Uranus feel humiliated, but it also gave him a sense of crisis. He once again thought of that haunting prophecy, the one he had gradually put out of his mind over the years, yet which still resurfaced from time to time. That fellow had said his child would raise a blade against him and overthrow his rule, but he hadn't specified which child. The 12 titans were indeed weak enough, but what if it was one of the later children? Behind Uranus's deep loathing for these three strange, ugly, and unintelligent monsters lay a hidden wariness. Every day he tried to deal with these three monsters. No matter how Gaia tried to dissuade him, no matter how she pleaded, he remained unmoved. Furthermore, these three low-intelligence beings had no concept of fear. Even when Uranus used Genesis' great power to torture them until they were covered in wounds, they only stared back at him with that single eye, glaring fixedly. Whenever he saw those unrepentant, fearless eyes, Uranus felt only immense rage. He felt that his dignity and authority as the God King were being insulted. Look at them, Gaia. These monsters have no respect for the God King at all. Uranus could no longer suppress his anger. His cold gaze swept over the three monsters as he spoke cruelly, I can no longer tolerate them. These three Cyclops had been born over 100 years ago. Every time Uranus wanted to dispose of them, he was stopped by Gaia. Out of respect for the God Queen, Uranus had temporarily tolerated them, but these 100 years of tolerance had completely exhausted the last of his patience. So this time, no matter how Gaia pleaded or tried to stop him, he had made up his mind, he would thoroughly deal with these three monsters. But how was he to deal with them? The God King found himself in a predicament. Gods could not be killed. Although these three monsters held no divine office, they likewise could not be destroyed. Finally, he turned his gaze toward the abyss at the edge of the earth. That was the domain of another of the primordial gods, Tartarus, the god of the abyss. Except for Gaia, who was far too personified, the other primordial gods were barely personified at all. This ensured their power, but similarly, because they were not personified, they almost never participated in the struggles for divine power. The abyss where Tartarus resided always maintained its non-personified, primordial state. Uranus used his immense power to seize the three giants, casting them down from the high mountain into the bottomless pit of the abyss. At the same time, the God King's majestic voice echoed across the earth. In the name of the God King, I declare the Cyclops guilty of arrogance. They shall be imprisoned for eternity, until the end of the world. Gaia watched all this in disbelief, the words practically bursting from her. Uranus, what are you doing? Have you gone mad? Uranus had thrown the three Cyclops into the abyss, and since the abyss was connected to the earth, it was equivalent to forcibly stuffing the three giants back into her body. The immense pain caused the merciful Earth Mother's expression to twist. The agonizing wails of the Cyclops echoed continuously in her mind. This dual physical and mental torture nearly drove her to madness. Yet Uranus merely watched it all happen with indifference, an indifference so cold it made her feel chilled to the bone. For the first time in her life, she felt that Uranus was simply unreasonable. Their past love had vanished like smoke. In this moment, her heart held nothing but endless resentment. But Uranus took no notice of this. Having finally eliminated a major concern, he relaxed, a long-absent smile appearing on his face. This joy gave him the urge to vent. He looked at Gaia and, ignoring her reluctance and struggle, forcibly made the sky and earth press together once more. For a time, the entire heaven and earth merged, and the world was left in a state of chaos. The exceptionally fierce quarrel between the God King and the God Queen alarmed nearly every god in the world, and the 12 titans once again trembled, feeling a deep-seated fear. The deep pit smashed by the Cyclops and the wails of those forcibly stuffed into the abyss left them even more terrified. For these thousands of years, they had diligently performed their divine duties without daring to be the least bit negligent, yet they could still feel Uranus's dissatisfaction with them. The God King was so capricious, he would torture them when he was happy and double the torture when he was angry. Had it not been for the fact that gods cannot die, they would have already died 10,000 times over. But even if gods do not die, they lived every day in anxiety and worry, their fear of Uranus having become instinctual. Now, seeing the fate of the three Cyclops, they couldn't help but worry about their own future. Though they did not like these three monster-like younger brothers, the end the Cyclops met once again showed them the cruelty and tyranny of their father, the God King Uranus. Moreover, no one knew if this would also be their own end. They could only be more careful, not daring to be the least bit negligent, fearing that they would be the next ones cast into the abyss. And while the gods were in a state of terror and unease, the ocean stream surrounding the world welcomed its first guest in many years. Talon, who had been sleeping to accumulate divine power, was awakened by this fierce quarrel and personally witnessed the three Cyclops being imprisoned. Thus, he came to the ocean stream to visit its master, Oceanus. Oceanus is one of the 12 titans. At birth, he divided the authority of the primordial sea god, Pontus, splitting the ocean in two. The lord of the distant ocean was still Pontus, but the ocean stream surrounding the world was ruled by Oceanus. In addition, there was Tethys, the primordial water, who symbolized water sources and rain. She was also one of the 12 Titans and the wife of Oceanus, and the two lived together in the ocean stream. Furthermore, as the world grew larger, the ocean stream surrounding it expanded as well, making Oceanus the strongest among the 12 Titans, having already attained great divine power centuries ago. In later generations, Oceanus and Tethys would father 3,000 Oceanids and 3,000 river god, becoming the source of all water gods. But now, because Uranus monopolizes paternal rights and does not allow the Titans to unite and procreate, there were only the two of them in the vast ocean stream. At this moment, they were feeling terrified because of the fate of the Cyclops. Being the strongest of the 12 Titans, Oceanus was also the one Uranus targeted the most. He feared that the God King would appear before him at any moment and lock him in the depths of the abyss, leaving him in a state of constant anxiety. Sensing Talon's arrival, his first reaction was terror, and he even wanted to flee, not daring to meet with Talon. He still remembered the prophecy from 1,000 years ago, and he believed that his father, that king of the gods, remembered it too. If Uranus were to find out that Talon had come to see him, wouldn't that imply he was the one in the prophecy who would overthrow the God King? Then Uranus would absolutely, definitely never let him off. But in the end, he did not flee, thanks to Tethys' persuasion. Tethys believed that since Talon had already arrived, the fact remained whether he met him or not. If the God King Uranus found out, he would not let the matter rest. In that case, it would be better to see what Talon came for and what he had to say. The two of them received Talon in person. 1,000 years had passed, and the once weak god of prophecy, who could not even stabilize his own divine office, had grown much stronger. Though still not as powerful as Oceanus and Tethys, he had reached the level of weak divine power. His appearance, however, was no different from 1,000 years ago, still handsome and young, appearing even somewhat gentle and polite. Respected Lord Talon, may I ask what you have come here for? Oceanus spoke first. He was so panicked, feeling like a thief with a guilty conscience and fearing that Uranus would descend at any moment, that he lost his composure. Talon smiled and comforted him, no need to worry. The God King is busy bonding with the God Queen, he won't notice for such a short while. Only then did Oceanus relax slightly, but he was still far from at ease, like a bird startled by the mere twang of a bow. In truth, he had been tortured by Uranus too many times over the years, and the pain he had endured was simply too much. Seeing this, Talon sighed and said, Respected Lord of the Ocean Stream, Prince Oceanus, don't you think your current appearance is far too lowly? Oceanus gave a bitter smile, not even in the mood to be angry, his face full of misery, but what can I do? He is just too strong. He didn't even dare to call the other by name, showing that his fear was bone deep. Then have you never thought of resisting? Talon asked. Oceanus's heart skipped a beat, what he feared most had finally come. He hurriedly waved his hands, saying with a face full of terror, I dare not have the slightest disloyal thought, he will find out. Talon shook his head. To defeat the God King, strength was actually secondary, the most important thing was the courage to wield a blade against him. And this strongest titan, Oceanus, clearly did not possess it. However, there is no need for you to do anything, Prince, Talon said. You only need to answer me. Are you unwilling to continue living this kind of life? Oceanus finally breathed a sigh of relief, and after a long while, he nodded hesitantly. Of course he was unwilling, no god would be. Then you only need to eliminate the source of trouble forever at the necessary moment, Talon said. Only you can do this. Oceanus looked puzzled. Respected god of prophecy, what do you mean? You can understand it as a prophecy about you, Talon said. Everything ends where it began. Remember, only you can eliminate the source of trouble forever. Oceanus still didn't understand, but that didn't matter. Talon had finished the prophecy, and as the gears of fate began to turn once more, he felt his divine power increase within him. After a thought, he said to Oceanus, if you want to increase your strength, perhaps you could start with procreation. It is possible for gods to fuse into stronger laws, resulting in newly born gods, and with every additional law, the world develops faster and the rules become more complete. Only when the world develops quickly and there are more gods will the fate Talon sees be more than just a mere handful of souls, which currently leaves him, the god of fate, with very little divine power. It's still necessary to encourage more births, otherwise, who will build the world? Whose fate would he, the god of fate, control? Hearing this, Oceanus sighed, the great god king monopolizes paternal rights, we do not have the right to procreate. Talon looked at him and gave a mysterious smile, it's fine. You will have it soon enough. Oceanus froze again, but before he could ask, that weak god of foreknowledge had already left, just as silently as he had arrived. But at this moment, stormy waves were set off in Oceanus's heart. What the meaning behind Talon's final words implied, he didn't even dare to contemplate. Talon returned to his residence. He knew that the time he had been waiting for was not far off. Time passed quickly as the Titans lived in anxiety, Gaia suppressed her anger and resentment, and Uranus continued his arrogant ways. 100 years after the imprisonment of the Cyclops, Gaia gave birth to 3 more monsters. This time, they were the Hecatoncheires, even more terrifying than the Cyclops. They had 50 heads and 100 arms, with hideous faces, no fear of danger or divine power, and possessed immense strength. They were more powerful than the Cyclops, born with great divine power. Even the 12 Titans, who had grown for over 1,000 years, were no match for them. This sent His Majesty the God King into a towering rage, and a strong sense of crisis began to entwine around him. If the previous Cyclops represented the rift between the God King and the God Queen, symbolizing imperfection and dissatisfaction, then these Hecatoncheires represented the division and hatred between heaven and earth. By this time, the relationship between Uranus and Gaia had dropped to freezing point. Gaia would never criticize her children for their appearance or power, but Uranus's disgust was glaringly obvious. Uranus was unwilling to grant even a shred of patience this time. The moment the Hecatoncheires were born, he used his creative divine power as God King to throw these 3 monsters into the endless abyss without hesitation. This time, he didn't even bother to fabricate a crime. This brutal act caused the 12 Titans, who were once again drawn by the massive commotion, to fall into a panic of self-preservation. They didn't even dare to take a second look, prostrating themselves and praying for the God King's anger to subside, fearing they would be caught in the crossfire. Uranus did not think he had done anything wrong. He was the high and mighty God King, the Lord of the world recognized by the entire world. Any existence that made him unhappy was inherently guilty. He even blamed Gaia, berating her for giving birth to even more hideous and terrifying Hecatoncheires after already bearing monsters like the Cyclops. Gaia, who had just finished giving birth, was extremely weak. She could not stop the mad Uranus and could only watch helplessly as her children were thrown into the abyss, only to be stuffed back into her body through the abyss. The painful wails of the Hecatoncheires echoed in her mind, mingling with the cries of the already present Cyclops, giving her a splitting headache and not a moment's peace. Furthermore, having children who had already been born forcibly stuffed back inside was a violent interruption of the laws of childbirth, dealing a severe blow to her already weakened body. And her former beloved, instead of showing any remorse, was accusing and cursing her. This double torment of body and spirit finally pushed Gaia's resentment and hatred to their peak at this moment. The past affection and sweetness vanished completely. At this moment, only one thought remained in the mind of the benevolent Mother Earth. She wanted to end these painful days. But how to end it? Gaia had no idea for a moment. Although she was a primordial god, she was not skilled in combat. Coupled with the exhaustion of these years and the injuries caused by the birth and forced return of the Cyclops and Hecatoncheires, her divine power had plummeted repeatedly. Now, she was no longer a match for Uranus at all. On her own, there was no possibility of overthrowing him. For a while, Gaia didn't know who to turn to for help. Uranus, on the other hand, did not notice any abnormality in his god queen. The birth of the Hecatoncheires had given him a strong sense of crisis, and he once again remembered that haunting prophecy. First it was the Cyclops, and now the Hecatoncheires, each stronger than the last. What would be next? Would the next one be born with even more than great divine power? The current children could not yet threaten his position as God King, but what about the ones to come? This thought made him almost restless. After much thought, Uranus decided to visit the 3 mysterious goddesses of fate again. Over 1,000 years had passed since his last visit, they might have glimpsed some traces of fate and might be able to tell him something. Thinking this, he turned to Gaia and invited her as if nothing had happened. My God Queen, I am going to visit the 3 fates to see if they have discovered anything in these 1,000 years. Would you like to come with me? Gaia looked at the man who had just committed such atrocities and caused her immense harm, yet was now inviting her so casually. Her heart turned completely cold. She did not refuse and nodded expressionlessly. Uranus was not unaware of Gaia's resentment over these 1,000 years, but he didn't care. In his view, Gaia had given birth to these hideous monsters who disrespected the God King, and the fact that he hadn't punished her was already an act of leniency. Gaia should be grateful to him. He also had no fear that Gaia would retaliate against him, as it was well known that the benevolent Mother Earth was not skilled in combat. Moreover, what he cared about more right now was his future fate. The 2 of them thus arrived once again before the Temple of Fate. The 3 fates were still in the temple organizing the threads that symbolized fate. They showed no surprise at the arrival of Uranus and Gaia, as if they had long expected it. Respected goddesses of fate, 1,000 years ago you said that when you had grown a bit and could see the outline of fate, you would allow us to visit again. I wonder if now is the time. Uranus spoke first. Even as the god king, he still maintained respect for these mysterious goddesses of fate. Respected great god king, your destiny is so noble. We have tried to explore it, but there are still no results. The crisp voice of the eldest sister, Clotho, echoed in the temple, carrying an ethereal quality. Uranus was somewhat disappointed but still asked unwillingly, is there not even a single hint, beautiful goddesses? I only need a small hint. His Majesty the God King, our abilities are truly limited, it is not that we do not wish to help you, the second sister, Lachesis, said in a helpless tone. Gaia watched this scene coldly the entire time, even finding it somewhat ridiculous. Could the arrogant Uranus actually have moments of fear? It seemed he really did care about that prophecy. Despite looking down so much on Lord Talon who gave the prophecy, he was still brooding over it. Thinking of Talon, Gaia's heart suddenly stirred. She remembered the words Talon had spoken when they parted 1,000 years ago. That weak but sincere god of prophecy had told her that if one day she made up her mind, she could go to him and he would do his best to help her. But, Lord Talon was so weak, what could he possibly help her with? Gaia sighed, but she still decided to find a time to secretly meet Talon, at least to clarify which child the original prophecy had spoken of. Just as she was making a plan in her heart, the youngest of the three sisters of fate sighed helplessly under Uranus's persistent questioning. Since your Majesty the God King is so insistent, then let us go and ask our Father God. Perhaps he will know the answer. As soon as these words were spoken, both Uranus and Gaia were stunned. The Father God of the three fates. Neither the God King Uranus nor Mother Earth Gaia ever knew that the three fates actually had a Father God. When these three goddesses were first born and they felt the fluctuations, they had clearly only sensed the power of the esteemed goddess of night, Her Highness Nyx. This meant that the three fates were conceived by Nyx alone. As one of the primordial gods, Nyx's strength was beyond doubt, so it was not surprising that she could give birth to these three goddesses who could glimpse into fate. But how could there be a Father God? When these goddesses were born, they hadn't felt his presence at all. Uranus and Gaia did not know it was because Talon was simply too weak at the time, so weak that his meager power was completely masked by Nyx's immense divine energy, leaving no trace of fluctuation to escape. They wouldn't even think in that direction, in fact, their guesses were quite the opposite. Could it be because the other party was too strong, and their power at the time was insufficient to perceive him? After all, Uranus was not yet the God King back then, and Gaia was busy giving birth to the 12 titans, putting her in a weakened state. Thinking of this, a person instantly came to both their minds, the twin of darkness born alongside Nyx, one of the primordial gods, His Highness Erebus. Respected goddesses, is your father His Highness Erebus? Gaia asked. She was somewhat puzzled. As a fellow primordial god, she knew that Erebus did not seem to possess authority over fate. O great and beautiful God Queen, please forgive our rudeness. Our Father God does not wish for too many people to know of him and disturb him, so we cannot say. Clotho, Lachesis, and Atropos spoke simultaneously, their coordination so perfect it was as if a single person were speaking. Gaia nodded and spoke no more. Uranus, however, felt as if he had seen a glimmer of hope. He didn't care who the Father God of the three fates was, he only wanted to know his own destiny. So he spoke up, then I shall trouble you, goddesses. I will await your results. Seeing that the goddesses of fate had agreed, he finally felt at ease. With his mood improved, he decided to train his children, those 12 titans whose weakness made him feel secure. Gaia did not stop him, for she knew she couldn't, and besides, she had things of her own to do. After ensuring that God King Uranus had left, she quietly departed from the divine mountain and came to the endless void where Talon resided. As she approached, she saw a handsome, gentle-looking youth dressed in white robes already standing there waiting for her. Long time no see, kind and respected Mother Earth, Talon took the initiative to speak. His voice was neither high nor low, yet it carried a reassuring power. Gaia could feel that over the past 1,000 years, Talon's divine power had increased significantly. Although it was still far inferior to hers, it was an impressively rapid growth. But that didn't matter, because she was only there to ask about the prophecy. She never expected Talon to actually take action against Uranus, that would be too far-fetched. Respected Highness Talon, I wonder if you still remember our agreement from 1,000 years ago, Gaia spoke, her voice thick with exhaustion. Unlike the beautiful young girl filled with love from a millennium ago, Mother Earth Gaia now looked haggard, appearing much older. Of course I remember, kind Mother Earth. I am saddened by all that you have endured, Talon sighed. How do you wish for me to help you? I've had enough of these painful days. I want to end it all, Gaia said, her eyes burning with flames of anger that stemmed from 1,000 years of suppressed resentment. For all these years, I have endured every single day. He tortures my children until they are covered in wounds, his demands on me are insatiable, and he even personally imprisoned our newborn children, violating my laws of procreation. I can no longer tolerate this, he will destroy everything sooner or later. O great prophet, I want to know, in your original prophecy, who is the child who can overthrow Uranus? Gaia no longer naively hoped that Uranus could coexist peacefully with their children, for that was simply impossible. Uranus's character dictated that weak children would be tortured by him, and strong children would be imprisoned. As the 12 titans grew stronger over time, the day would come when they too would be locked away in Tartarus. Uranus would never spare anyone who made him feel threatened, regardless of whether they were his children or not. But Gaia could not stand by and watch this happen, for the kind Mother Earth possessed an incomparable love for her children, one that even exceeded her love for herself. This was the manifestation of the laws of procreation. Fate will guide you to find that child. All you need to do is bring him to see me. Talon's voice remained calm and steady, showing no sign of reaction to Gaia's loss of composure. Furthermore, you must understand that a god king cannot be killed, he can only be defeated. I know, but. A look of hesitation appeared on Gaia's face, and she couldn't help but doubt, can he really be defeated? No one knew Uranus's strength better than Gaia. The god king's power had long since surpassed that of the primordial gods, his creative might was such that even all her children combined likely couldn't shake him in the slightest. Nothing is eternal, and nothing is invincible, Talon smiled and said calmly. You only need to find that child and bring him to see me. That is all. Then how should I look for him? Gaia asked instinctively. Defeating a god king does not necessarily require immense divine power, but it certainly requires the courage to face danger without fear, Talon said. Everything is predestined, you will find him. Courage. Gaia repeated the word, finally understanding something. She nodded, but her heart was still filled with uncontrollable worry. Uranus was simply too powerful, despairingly so. No matter how confident Talon appeared, Gaia could not bring herself to believe him. For Talon was so weak that Gaia felt coming to him for a solution might have been a foolish mistake. Just as she was wavering, new visitors arrived in the void. Before the three beautiful and exquisite young maidens even drew near, their crisp, ethereal voices rang out, filled with heartfelt reverence. Father God, we look forward to receiving the guidance of fate. Gaia turned her head in shock, only to see the three maidens of fate, who had sat so haughtily in the temple not long ago, now bowing respectfully toward Talon. They called that weak fellow Father God. Gaia was completely stunned. Gaia returned to the divine mountain, but her heart was still far from calm. Talon, that weak god of prophecy, was actually the father of the three fates. Even after seeing it with her own eyes, Gaia still found it incredible and hard to believe. This discovery reminded her of many things she had never considered before, why Talon was born even earlier than the primordial gods yet remained so weak, and why, despite being so weak, he could see the fate of the god king. Because he was fate itself, and fate was something that could never be controlled. Only things that had already happened could be considered fixed, what had not yet occurred could only be considered a prophecy. This also explained why Talon could grow from a weak existence that couldn't even stabilize his divine form to his current weak divine power in just a short 1,000 years. This speed was actually quite fast because he had been pushing the development of fate. From giving the prophecy at the beginning to reminding her how to act now, everything was something he had anticipated long ago. He wasn't some god of prophecy at all, he was the god of fate. The divine office he couldn't control and needed the god king's help to stabilize back then wasn't the weak prophecy, but the uncontrollable fate. That was why he could conceive the three fates with the noble goddess of night. The great ability of those three goddesses to glimpse a corner of fate came from Talon's gift. It was laughable that Uranus had no idea how generous a gift his casual remark back then had been, a gift that would even cost him his throne as god king in the future. Yet he remained ignorant, still thinking Talon was an insignificant fellow not worth a second glance. This arrogance and pride would eventually make him pay the price. Having thought everything through, Gaia marveled at the fickleness of fate, but her overwhelming feeling was one of pleasant surprise. She finally believed Talon's words. If he was the great god of fate, it proved that the prophecy he spoke 1,000 years ago would surely come true. Uranus would be overthrown by his own children, and she was the relative who would help her children. Gaia's heart, which had been anxious because Talon was too weak, had now completely settled. She chose to firmly believe in the guidance of fate. At this time, the 12 titans were once again overwhelmed by Uranus's tortuous amusement. They came in a wretched state to beg for the protection of Mother Earth, Gaia. It had been like this for the past 1,000 years. Whenever they reached their limit, they would beg Gaia for protection. Each time, Gaia would step forward and take the initiative to engage in painful intercourse with Uranus to give her children a chance to breathe. But this time, she did not do so. Uranus didn't want to have an outright confrontation with Gaia either. Still mindful of the prophecy, he went to the Temple of Fate again to wait for a response from the three fates. He didn't know that during the time he left the Divine Mountain, a conversation capable of influencing the world was taking place. Gaia looked at her bruised and battered children before her, feeling only immense heartache. She carefully healed their wounds, her expression filled with uncontrollable sorrow. My poor children, your injuries are so heartbreaking. Your father, that merciless God King, how could he be so cruel to you? The 12 titans were each suffering terribly from the torture and were in very poor condition, only able to find a moment's respite by relying on Gaia. Children, I have had enough of these sorrowful days, and I believe you have as well. If that's the case, why don't we end this terrible life? As soon as these words were spoken, the expressions of the 12 titans changed instantly. They looked in astonishment at Mother Earth, who was always known for her kindness, as if finding it unbelievable that she could say such a thing. That tyrannical monarch has harmed you, violated the laws of my childbirth, and even stuffed your brothers back into my body for eternal imprisonment. This is a violation of nature and the will of the world. He is no longer fit to be the God King. Gaia spoke coldly. The former love and sweetness had completely vanished. Nearly 1,000 years of torture left her with nothing but hatred and loathing for Uranus. The 12 titans felt Gaia's determination. They also hadn't expected that the relative who would help them in the prophecy from 1,000 years ago would actually be this kind Earth Mother. But it made sense. What relative could be closer than their own mother? But our strength is too weak. We cannot oppose the God King at all. Oceanus, ocean god, couldn't help but speak, his voice laced with unhideable fear. He was one of the most powerful gods among the 12 titans, but just like when he faced Talon, he lacked any courage to resist Uranus. Not just him, the other titans also fell into silence, not a single one dared to speak up. Similarly, nearly 1,000 years of torture had caused the 12 titans' fear of Uranus to seep into their very marrow. They didn't dare face this great divine father, let alone brandish a blade against him. Furthermore, the gap in strength between the two sides was far too vast. Uranus was the god king recognized by the world, and his divine power even surpassed that of the primordial gods, reaching the level of Genesis' great power. With power at this level, even if the 12 titans and Gaia were added together, they wouldn't be enough to withstand a single blow from Uranus. How is this any different from going to a certain death? Gaia's gaze swept across each of her 12 children. Any titan met by her eyes lowered their head, not daring to meet her look. Gaia immediately felt an immense sense of disappointment. She didn't press them or reproach them, she simply said calmly, "You can choose silence, but you must know that your Father God will not allow any powerful existence to emerge. In just 1,000 years, you have already reached great divine power. What about the future? How much longer do you think that tyrannical God King will allow you to exist? One day, the God King will lose his patience and strike against you. You will be like your brothers, imprisoned for eternity. At that time, even I won't be able to help you." Gaia spoke the cruelest truth in the calmest manner, and this reality completely shattered the self-deceiving escapism of the 12 titans. In their hearts, they were all well aware that if they didn't resist, there would only be one outcome. Sooner or later, they would be eternally imprisoned by that God King. And that day would not be far off. Looking at her children, whose expressions had changed, Gaia softened her voice and said seriously and with certainty, "Do not be afraid, fate is on our side. We will surely succeed. There may be some setbacks, but we will certainly succeed." The Earth Mother's confidence infected the Titans, making them no longer feel so anxious and uneasy, yet still, no one had the courage to stand up. Just as Gaia was about to fall into complete disappointment, finally, someone spoke. "Mother Goddess, I can try." Under Gaia's comfort and encouragement, someone finally stood up. Everyone looked toward the source of the voice and was stunned. It was the youngest of the 12 Titans, Cronus, the god of space-time. Because he was the youngest and his strength was considered weak among the 12 Titans, Cronus was tortured the least by Uranus, unlike his siblings who lived in misery every day. Uranus's gaze was only ever focused on the powerful Titans. For a weakling like Cronus, he felt that even lifting a hand would be a blow to his own pride. Just as he was so preoccupied with the prophecy that he would be overthrown by his children yet never bothered Talon, his arrogance and conceit made him feel that arguing with such weaklings would diminish his divine status. But it was precisely because of this that Cronus, who escaped suffering due to his weakness, did not fear him as much, at least, not with a fear that reached into his very marrow like his siblings. He was still afraid. It was impossible not to fear such a powerful god king, so he did not step forward at the beginning. But under Gaia's persuasion and comfort, he also recognized the essence of the matter. Evading is meaningless. If they do not resist now, there may never be another chance to resist in the future. He did not want to be imprisoned for eternity, so he had to stand up. Seeing him be the first to step forward, the crowd was more than just surprised. Cronus, do you know what you are saying? Hyperion, the god of light and sun, could not help but scold in a low voice. You are so weak, you have no chance of victory against the god king. Not just Hyperion, but the other titans were also whispering, all finding it utterly absurd. This was simply an impossible task. Enough, Hyperion. And the rest of you, shut up. You lack courage yourselves, yet you attack your brave brother. Gaia coldly interrupted the titans' voices. The Mother Earth approached her youngest child, and only then did her expression soften. Cronus, your bravery has made me see you in a new light, but I must ask you once more, have you thought this through? Gaia looked at Cronus and confirmed seriously. This matter may be extremely dangerous. Without enough courage, we cannot succeed. Cronus did not back down because of the other Titan's skepticism. He was a god with a strong will. Once he made up his mind to do something, he would not change it easily. He nodded solemnly and said without hesitation, I am willing to try, even if the final result is failure. Besides, we actually haven't had a choice for a long time, have we? If we resist, there might be a glimmer of hope. If not, only one ending remains. Gaia grabbed Cronus's hand with some excitement. Good child, your courage fills me with relief. It should be like this, it must be like this, you are the one I am looking for. Fate is indeed on our side. At this moment, Gaia finally clearly understood the meaning of Talon's words. Uranus's power was unmatched, even the 12 titans combined were no match for him. Thus, the strength of divine power was not important. What mattered was the courage to resist even while knowing the gap was vast and that failure was highly likely. Such fearless courage was destined not to be possessed by everyone, which was why Talon said she would easily find the child in the prophecy. And the facts proved it so. Cronus, however, did not know that Gaia had received the guidance of fate. Although he was brave, he was not reckless. He looked at his mother and asked seriously, Respected mother, what should I do? I do not have a weapon capable of opposing the God King, nor do I know how to defeat him and end this tyrannical rule. The 12 titans also nodded repeatedly after hearing this. Since that prophecy appeared 1,000 years ago, the God King Uranus had issued a command to the entire world. Any sword or blade that appeared would not escape his perception. They did not even have weapons, so how could they strike at the God King? My child, that is not important, Gaia said. Your brothers, the natural divine smiths, the Cyclops, are already forging weapons for us. They are inside my body, even the God King cannot detect what they are doing. After saying this, Gaia could not help but sigh once more at the fickleness of fate. If Uranus had not feared the strength of the Cyclops and stuffed them back into the womb, they would have had no way to forge weapons behind his back. And they happened to be the most outstanding divine smiths in the world. As for the way to defeat him, perhaps we should follow the guidance of fate, Gaia said to her children. Meanwhile, outside the temple of the three fates, Uranus waited with rare patience. Finally, he waited until the goddesses of fate returned, but looking at the direction from which they came, Uranus felt some doubt. That did not seem to be the direction of the land of eternal night where Erebus resided. However, he did not bother to think deeply and went straight to meet them. Respected three goddesses, regarding the question I asked, have you obtained an answer? The three goddesses looked at the God King who came forward and nodded together, their voices ringing out in unison. Great God King, we have received the guidance of fate. What is it? Even as noble as the God King, Uranus could not help but be somewhat nervous at this moment. Your fate, you already know, the eldest sister Clotho said. Uranus was taken aback, then frowned. What do you mean? I already know my fate. Is it that prophecy? The goddesses of fate did not answer his question. The second sister, Lachesis, looked directly into the God King's eyes and said seriously, Great God King, your fate is in your own hands. Before he could speak, the youngest sister Atropos had already given the summary. You're the God King recognized by the world. Aside from this world, no one can shake your position. As soon as these words were spoken, Uranus's furrowed brow smoothed out instantly. He let out a hearty laugh and said with emotion, "Yes, that is a fact I have long known." He thanked the goddesses sincerely, feeling that the stone hanging high in his heart had finally completely hit the ground. He felt that he had been far too cautious, it was completely unnecessary. Thus, he thoroughly threw that ridiculous prophecy to the back of his mind and no longer worried. He returned to the divine mountain and found his god queen, Gaia. Heaven and earth were joined together once again. He was too happy, so much so that he did not notice at all that Gaia was very silent today, nor did he notice that among his 12 incompetent and cowardly children, the weakest one had quietly headed toward a void space. The young member of the Titan clan, Cronus, the god of space-time, followed the guidance of Gaia, Mother Earth, and entered this void space for the first time. This was the edge of the world, desolate and chaotic, where day and night were indistinguishable and no breath of life existed. Yet, unlike the land of eternal night, it was not perpetually pitch black, the light sources were the bright stars scattered deep within the universe. Those stars always moved according to their original trajectories. Beneath the countless stars, a handsome and gentle man sat quietly under the starry sky, his deep and bright purple eyes seemingly able to see through everything. He wore simple white robes, looking exactly as he did when they first met in the temple 1,000 years ago, as if the passage of a millennium had left no mark upon him. Though his divine power had grown, in the eyes of the already powerful Cronus, he still appeared very weak, at least, he was certainly no match for Cronus. If Gaia, Mother Earth, had not suggested he pay a visit to Talon to seek the guidance of fate, Cronus would never have thought to come here. Regarding the prophecy Talon gave in the temple 1,000 years ago, the 12 Titans, the god King Uranus, and even Gaia shared the same view. They felt Talon's prophecy was inaccurate because he was too weak. However, because Uranus and Gaia had already seen one prophecy come true, witnessing the birth of the 12 Titans with their own eyes, they still harbored some lingering doubts. The 12 Titans, on the other hand, simply did not believe it at all. They even felt hostility toward this fellow who had caused them to be tortured by the God King and wanted to seek revenge. After all, they couldn't defeat the God King, but surely they could defeat such a weak god of prophecy. But fearing that Uranus would suspect them of having ulterior motives, the 12 Titans ultimately didn't dare to act rashly. They could only swallow their resentment. Under such circumstances, they naturally had no good impression of Talon. To use the words of Hyperion, the god of the sun and light, to describe Talon, he was a weak, detestable charlatan and fraud. Cronus had once thought the same, but Gaia's emphasis on the matter made him keenly sense that something was amiss. As one of the primordial gods and the great Mother Earth, she had personally acknowledged Talon's prophecy as the guidance of fate. What did that imply? Cronus was clearly an intelligent deity. Thus, upon meeting Talon, he set aside all contempt, bowed seriously, and took the initiative to offer a greeting. Great Lord Talon, please forgive my intrusion. My respected Divine Mother sent me to seek your help and request a hint regarding fate. His posture could be described as very humble, yet Talon did not seem surprised. The expression on his face didn't change, still wearing that gentle smile. Noble Cronus, god of space-time, you are too polite, Talon said. The humility and courage you possess are the most noble of qualities. It is my honor to relieve your worries. Lord Cronus, what is it you wish to know? Hearing this, Cronus immediately said impatiently, the god King Uranus is too tyrannical, we have reached the end of our patience. Just as you prophesied 1,000 years ago, I, the son of god King Uranus, wish to overthrow his rule. My mother has already prepared the weapon from your prophecy, but how should I take action? He showed a distressed expression and sighed. Compared to the formidable might of the God King, we are all too weak. Even with the sharpest weapon in the world, it is difficult to oppose him. I want to know how I can manage to defeat him. He is simply invincible. Talon smiled upon hearing this. He didn't answer Cronus's question directly, but instead explained the nature of a God King. Lord Cronus, you must understand that the reason Uranus is the God King is because he has received the recognition of the world. He is the symbol of masculinity, the origin of patriarchy, and the master of the sky, only then is he the supreme God King. Cronus frowned as he listened. A spark of inspiration seemed to flash in his mind, but it was too vague and faint to grasp. In the chaos world, except for a few deities, all other gods are his descendants. Every additional god means an additional law, and every law plays a crucial role in the perfection of the world. That is why the world recognized him. Therefore, aside from the source of the chaos world itself, no one can defeat the supreme god King Uranus. As he listened to Talon's explanation, Cronus's frown deepened, because these words seemed to emphasize that Uranus was completely unbeatable. But if that were the case, why did he give such a prophecy 1,000 years ago? Doubt, confusion, and various emotions swirled in Cronus's heart, but he suppressed the urge to question and asked humbly, then, what you mean is? You cannot defeat the supreme God King who holds the world's recognition. No one in this world can do that. What you can defeat is only the powerful master of the sky. Cronus's eyes instantly lit up as if he had realized something. Sure enough, he heard Talon continue. Patriarchy and masculinity are the keys to his recognition by the world, they are the root of everything. As long as you erase his patriarchy and masculinity, he will no longer be the supreme God King recognized by the world, but merely a powerful god of the sky. And the 12 titans among you are each powerful deities. Facing a god of the sky who only possesses powerful divine strength, the scales of victory might not necessarily fail to tilt. So that's how it is. Cronus's eyes brightened uncontrollably. Only now did he understand the purpose of that sickle. Even a divine weapon forged by the world's most outstanding master smith might not be able to harm the supreme god King Uranus in a direct battle. Therefore, this weapon was never meant for a direct confrontation, but for a sneak attack to castrate his patriarchy and masculinity. An idea instantly formed in Cronus's mind, but he still suppressed his excitement and agitation. He bowed to Talon once more, his attitude even more respectful than before. O great god of prophecy, you are so wise. Your profound vision is admirable. You have helped me immensely. How should I repay you? Cronus was no fool. He had deeply realized that this seemingly weak deity before him was by no means simple. Under Gaia's hints, he even suspected that the other party might not be the god of prophecy, but the god of fate. In this situation, even though he had already received the hint, he did not believe he could get away without paying any price. In this world, what is free is often the most expensive. Talon smiled helplessly, originally intending to refuse, but seeing Cronus's persistence, he thought for a moment and said, then do as your father did. After you ascend to the throne of the God King, grant me one condition. Fulfill one condition for me after you become the God King. A simple sentence, yet it stirred uncontrollable waves within Cronus's heart. It wasn't because of the request for a condition, but because of the preceding phrase, after he became the new God King. Cronus was a very cautious god. Whether before Gaia or after meeting Talon, everything he had said from beginning to end was about overthrowing this tyrannical rule and ending these painful days. He had not shown even a shred of ambition to lay claim to the throne of the God King. It wasn't that he lacked such thoughts, but rather that among the 12 titans, he truly wasn't considered powerful. Right now, everyone wanted to overthrow the God King, so they were united. But once the God King, an enemy who seemed impossible to defeat, was conquered, conflict would surely break out among the 12 titans, for no one would not want to become the God King. In such a situation, Cronus was not confident he could defeat his other brothers. The other titans were one thing, he might have a fighting chance against them. But against the strongest titan, the lord of the ocean stream, Oceanus, Cronus felt he was no match at all. Yet Talon had said directly that he would become the new God King. Was this a new prophecy? A prophecy concerning him? Uncontrollably, Cronus's heart burned with heat. He wanted to endure it, but in the end, expectation and trepidation made him unable to resist speaking, asking in a low voice. Respected Lord Talon, do you believe I will become the new God King? Yes. Talon nodded with a smile. As for the concerns you have, they are not issues in the face of destined fate. You only need to remember that your humility and courage will bring you good luck. While you possess these noble virtues, fate is on your side. These words seemed to imply that Talon, suspected to be the god of fate, might help him at a critical moment. Cronus understood Talon's hint and was overjoyed, hurriedly bowing again to express his thanks. Although he didn't know how Talon's weak divine power could help him, he inexplicably felt a sense of peace. Remember, do not be reckless. Everything must be fully prepared before you act, Talon exhorted seriously at the end of their conversation. I will, respected Lord Talon, Cronus also stated solemnly. Having received his answer, he quickly took his leave. Talon watched the departing figure, clearly feeling his divine power growing rapidly. It was already close to reaching the level of intermediate divine power. This meant that he had once again pushed forward the development of fate. Furthermore, through these 1,000 years of exploration, Talon had discovered that the more powerful the being whose fate he influenced, the more power he gained. Prophesying Uranus's ascension to the throne of God King had allowed Talon to advance directly from minuscule divine power to weak divine power. Now, he had prophesied the end of this era and the ascension of the new God King, Cronus, which brought him to the brink of breaking through from weak to intermediate divine power, just one step away. At this level, he finally had a subtle connection with the world and could utilize some power derived from fate. Before, He was too weak, so weak he couldn't even use his own divine office. His divine power was simply too meager to support it. Now, he could use it simply, though it was still very taxing. In Talon's estimation, to truly use the power of fate freely, he would need to reach at least strong divine power. It couldn't be helped. When the divine office is too strong and he himself is too weak, such a situation occurs. But he had a premonition that when Uranus was completely overthrown and the first generation God King's era ended, he would surely reach intermediate divine power. And when Cronus ascended to become the second generation God King, he might be able to touch the edge of strong divine power. This speed of promotion was simply terrifying. One must know that the creatures of this world had not yet developed, many gods and humans were not yet born, and the fates belonging to them had not appeared. Merely during the era of the second God King, Talon might already be catching up to the 12 Titans. It was hard to imagine how powerful Talon would become once this world reached full prosperity. However, for now, that day was still very distant. There is still too little I can do right now, Talon couldn't help but sigh, continuing to wait patiently for the development and appearance of those fated events. With his intentional pushing, he knew that day would not be far off. In the blink of an eye, several more decades passed. These decades were calm, and nothing happened. Uranus, who had completely relaxed because of the words of the three fates, continued to wantonly insult the 12 Titans. Moreover, as the 12 Titans grew stronger, his torture became increasingly brutal. But as always, he ignored the weak Cronus. He didn't even care that the other might have hidden by Gaia's side out of fear of him, even finding it laughable. Such a weak fellow didn't even have the qualification to be looked at directly. He was so arrogant and conceited that he failed to notice the abnormality between Gaia and Cronus, nor did he discover that Cronus had quietly obtained that fated sickle from Gaia's hands. This weapon, forged by the natural master smiths, the Cyclops, within Gaia's body, had a strange shape and contained Mother Earth's most primal power, so it would not harm Gaia. Furthermore, because the Cyclops had forged it using Gaia's burning rage, holding it felt like possessing infinite power. It was the accumulation of grievances and hatred from over 1,000 years, the most powerful and sharpest counterattack from Mother Earth, who was not skilled in combat. On this day, heaven and earth joined together once more. The entire world was a mass of chaos, more disordered and frenzied than ever before. Because this time, it was Mother Earth, Gaia, who had taken the initiative to invite him. Uranus was pleasantly surprised. For over 1,000 years, Gaia had shown him nothing but resistance. This was the first time in a millennium that Gaia had actively accommodated him, making Uranus involuntarily recall the sweetness and love between them from 1,000 years ago. He inevitably fell into a frenzy, not sensing anything wrong at all. He only thought that Gaia had finally come to her senses and was willing to bow her head and reconcile with him, because he was the God King, and the God King could never be wrong. Just as he briefly lost his reason due to excitement, those 12 Titan children he had always looked down upon quietly approached this tightly joined heaven and earth. It is time, Rhea spoke, her gaze toward Cronus filled with gentleness and encouragement. Because of their divine authorities, Rhea, the goddess of the flow of time, and Cronus, the god of space-time, were fated spouses. She was also, from beginning to end, Cronus's greatest supporter. The other Titans did not speak, but they were all tense, watching Cronus as he tightly gripped the sickle. They all knew what this day signified, and were equally aware of the tragic end they would face if they failed. This made them uncontrollably nervous, and Cronus was no exception. Cronus took a deep breath, forcibly suppressing the surging emotions in his heart. The look in his eyes slowly became firm as he said, "Yes, it is time." Heaven and earth merged once more, and the world was a blur of chaos, seemingly no different from any previous time. In the mysterious void at the edge of the world, Talon was startled awake from his slumber. He felt the divine power within his body suddenly begin to surge. In a mere instant, his original bottleneck was shattered, and he reached the level of medium divine power. Talon immediately realized what was happening, his gaze shifting from the void toward the still entangled heaven and earth. Almost the very moment his gaze fell upon them, the tightly overlapping heaven and earth suddenly split apart, and the screams of the supreme god King Uranus echoed throughout the world. The power erupting from the god King's agony instantly swept across the earth. In the blink of an eye, the lush vegetation that had flourished over 1,000 years was annihilated. Under that unparalleled, out-of-control power, the entire world was left riddled with scars. It was then that the 12 Titans, who had been hiding behind the high peaks manifested by Gaia's body, stepped out one by one. Standing at the very front was Cronus, clutching a sickle. At this moment, Cronus's expression was resolute. The moment he decided to act, all hesitation and uncertainty had vanished, for he no longer had any path of retreat, and the same was true for the other Titans. They had already stood in opposition to the supreme god King Uranus, and there was no longer any room for reconciliation. Once they failed, what awaited them would be eternal imprisonment. Success or death. Meanwhile, Uranus was filled with shock and fury. It had all happened too fast. By the time he reacted, his supreme god king's power was rapidly draining away along with his severed symbol of masculinity. In just the blink of an eye, nearly half of his divine power had vanished. His godhead was continuously falling, and the world's recognition was abandoning him. Uranus didn't even have the leisure to trouble these rebels. Instead, he reached out to grab the mass of bloody flesh on the ground, letting out a furious roar. Give it back to me. For a god, especially a powerful creator god like him, such physical damage could easily be recovered. Unfortunately, the opponent had used a divine artifact. What is called fate destroys concepts and rules. But even so, as long as he could reclaim that mass of flesh, he could still heal and recover his masculinity and patriarchy. The 12 Titans, of course, would not sit idly by and watch him reclaim his power, and they risked everything to stop him. By now, Uranus had lost the supreme power of the God King, but he was still the powerful master of the sky. At this moment, he erupted with power like a madman, and the 12 Titans could only barely hold him back with all their might. Seeing that he was about to reach the mass of flesh, Cronus made a prompt decision, grabbed the flesh, and hurled it into the distance. He used great strength. The mass of flesh traced a perfect parabola in the air, directly crossing the world and falling into the boundless ocean stream that encircled the world. As that object crossed the world, countless drops of essence blood fell upon the earth, which later became the origin of the Erinyes, the giants, and the Melia nymphs. Uranus immediately looked toward the ocean. His brother, the primordial sea god Pontus, was there. As long as Pontus was willing, he could reclaim his severed remains immediately. But Pontus chose silence. This primordial sea god, who had always been indifferent to worldly struggles, had also suffered greatly over these 1,000 years due to Uranus's suspicion. He held all of this in his heart, and at this moment, it was impossible for him to help Uranus. You fooled rebels. Uranus let out a furious roar, his voice echoing across the entire earth. The strike from his children, the betrayal of his beloved, and the silence of his kin. At this moment, Uranus felt the sting of being deserted by everyone close to him. This is all your own doing. Cronus said coldly. My tyrannical father, it is time you paid for your brutal crimes. Uranus's eyes burned with a fire of rage, looking as if he wanted to swallow Cronus alive. Yet he still suppressed the surging emotions in his heart. Ignoring the entanglement of the 12 Titans, he directly utilized his authority over the sky to rush toward the ocean stream at extreme speed. He knew clearly that the most important thing now was to recover his strength, not to engage in meaningless entanglement with these rebels. Once he reclaimed the authority of the God King, these rebels would surely be cut into 1,000 pieces. The 12 Titans tried to stop him again, but Uranus's desperate eruption of divine power made it difficult for them to cope, because he didn't intend to defeat them, but rather to break free from them. Seeing that they were about to lose their hold on him, at this most critical moment, as if guided by something in the dark, Oceanus, the god of the ocean stream, suddenly thought of what Talon had said when he came to find him. Where it begins, it shall end. Only you can end all this. Remember, eliminate the source of the trouble forever. He finally understood the meaning of those words. His expression became extremely complex in an instant, but the situation was urgent. He could not afford to hesitate or think, and he fully activated his divine power, causing the entire ocean stream to boil. Countless feminine forces symbolizing the ocean and water sources gathered into that mangled flesh, completely annihilating the masculinity contained within. The flesh was dismembered in the water, turning into countless dreamlike bubbles. Uranus watched this scene with his own eyes and let out a roar of despair and rage. No. At this moment, he clearly felt something leave him forever. It was the world's recognition, and also his supreme position as God King. Having lost his masculinity and patriarchy forever, it was no longer possible for him to be the God King. He had lost everything. Unparalleled resentment swept through Uranus's heart. His gaze, which seemed ready to devour people, stared fixedly at the 12 Titans, and at Cronus, the culprit who held the sickle and caused all this. Even though he had lost the supreme power of the God King, he was still the powerful master of the sky. Although he and the 12 Titans were all of great divine power, there were still gaps within that rank. Some gods were of great divine power because they had barely reached that realm, while others were of great divine power because the next realm was too difficult to break through. Uranus was the latter, while the 12 Titans belonged to the former. If the fight continued, he might lose, but the 12 Titans would also pay an absolutely painful price. But Uranus, having completely lost his position as God King, no longer had the heart to continue fighting. He only wanted revenge, a frantic revenge. With a fury burning in his eyes that seemed ready to incinerate everything, he mobilized all his divine power. Looking at Cronus with eyes full of hatred, he used all his strength to command the entire world and make a final curse. Cronus, Uranus's voice was hoarse and low, each word weighted with the deepest malice, I shall curse you. Cronus sensed something was wrong and tried to stop him, but Uranus, who had burned everything, was so powerful at this moment that Cronus could hardly resist. Cronus could only watch him perform the curse, feeling something being forcibly placed upon him. But just as Uranus's curse was about to be uttered, a white-robed figure slowly emerged from the endless void. It was a man with a handsome appearance and an easygoing temperament. Talon looked at Uranus, who had completely fallen into madness, raised an index finger to his lips, and gave a soft, shish. Fate is unspeakable. With just one sentence, the curse Uranus had exerted all his strength to make could no longer be spoken. He looked at the white-robed figure in shock, his eyes full of disbelief. Talon, meanwhile, gave him a gentle smile, just as he had when they first met 1,000 years ago. This sudden turn of events left everyone stunned where they stood. Whether it was the curse Uranus cast with everything he had in his despair, or Talon's sudden appearance to interrupt it, the 12 Titans were caught completely off guard. They had no idea what had happened and could only stare blankly at this development that exceeded all their expectations. Uranus was also directly stunned. He never expected that his full-strength strike would be interrupted, and that the one to interrupt him would be that weak fellow he had always looked down upon. How was this possible? Even if he was no longer the God King, he was still the powerful sovereign of the sky, possessing power far beyond that of the 12 Titans. How could this weakling, who couldn't even stabilize his own divine office, interrupt a curse cast with all his might? Uranus was initially shocked and found it utterly inconceivable, but he soon realized something, recalling the strange things about Talon. Though not powerful, he was born earlier than the primordial gods. Not only did he foresee the birth of the 12 Titans, but he also personally prophesied the day Uranus would be overthrown, even seeing that the one to overthrow him would be his own child. This was not something a weak god of prophecy could achieve. Even the three fates could not see the destiny of a god king. What right or ability did a weak god of prophecy have? Wait, above the three fates, there was a father god. The direction they returned from after visiting their father god back then was exactly the void where Talon resided. Their father god was not Erebus, the eternal darkness, at all, but this Talon. He was not some god of prophecy either, he was actually the god of fate. Only in this way could he have stopped Uranus from uttering that fated curse. Uranus finally understood everything. He realized he hadn't lost to Cronus, but to his own arrogance and to the legendary fate. Everything that happened today had long been destined. All his struggles and resistance were merely a link in the inevitable realization of fate. Laughable, truly laughable. I actually never discovered your true divine office. You were so weak that I never paid you any mind. Uranus gave a miserable smile, understanding he had completely lost and there was no longer any possibility of a comeback. At this point, it was all too late. When his masculine symbol was annihilated, nothing could be done in time, he had no more chances. That curse he had exerted everything to command upon the world, which would inevitably come to pass, still took effect even though it wasn't spoken aloud. However, correspondingly, his divine power was rapidly declining, he was no longer able to fight. Cronus keenly noticed this and knew it was the perfect opportunity. Without the slightest hesitation, he spoke. I, Cronus, god of space-time, judge in the name of the future god king. The god of the sky has violated Mother Earth's laws of procreation and has been tyrannical toward the gods. He is guilty. I hereby announce that the god of the sky, Uranus, shall be sentenced to eternal sleep. From this day forward, the sky shall forever be distant from the earth, never to meet again. A god cannot be killed. Cronus could defeat Uranus, but he could never kill him. Furthermore, the world needed the sky, so he could not cast Uranus into Tartarus for eternal imprisonment. Settling for the next best thing, he could only force Uranus into an eternal slumber. Uranus did not resist, for he knew that the moment Talon appeared, everything lost its meaning. Feeling the divine power within him gradually falling silent, Uranus took one last deep look at the earth, which had remained silent throughout, and allowed the will of the world to erase his personified image. Under the close watch of the 12 Titans, he transformed into a mass of invisible gas. Following the aura of his true form, he rose higher and higher, finally reaching an immeasurable height and falling into an eternal sleep. With this, heaven and earth were finally completely separated, never to meet again. The sovereign of the sky, the supreme first-generation god king, Uranus's reign finally ended today. It was the curtain call of an era. Just as the prophecy from 1,000 years ago had said, he would rule this world for an era, but only for an era. Cronus, still holding his sickle, saw this scene and finally felt completely at ease. He instinctively looked for that white-robed figure in the void, only to find that the figure had disappeared at some unknown point, silently as if he had never come. This caused Cronus to frown deeply. Although Uranus hadn't been able to finish his words because of Talon's interruption, Cronus could feel the power of the curse entangling him. Even worse, he did not know the content of the curse. He intended to find out exactly what he had been cursed with, but he knew now was not the time. Uranus had been defeated, but his brothers and sisters were still there. The question of who would become the God King would likely not be easily resolved. But he soon discovered that his most feared opponent, the powerful Oceanus, was currently in a weakened state and had lost his ability to fight. Cronus immediately understood that this was the price Oceanus had paid to dismantle Uranus's physical form. The other titans were not much stronger than him, and with the divine artifact sickle in his hand, they were no match for him at all. Quickly assessing the situation, Cronus was first stunned, then overcome with wild joy. He finally understood what Talon meant by, fate is on his side. Now that everything had settled, he was effectively the certain choice for the next God King. At the same time, an uncontrollable trace of fear toward that mysterious god of fate emerged in his heart. He foresaw everything long ago. His abilities are bottomless. He is not nearly as weak as he appears on the surface, he could even interrupt Uranus's full-strength curse. Cronus thought this to himself, becoming increasingly wary of Talon. However, regardless of anything else, this tyrannical reign had finally ended. All problems and threats were resolved, and the world finally returned to peace once more. With the most powerful titan, Oceanus, having lost his fighting capacity, Cronus, who had exerted the most effort and contributed the most to this rebellion, deservedly became the next God King without much trouble. His courage and responsibility during this battle were enough to prove everything, and he successfully gained the recognition of the gods. As the gods declared their loyalty, the will of the world also recognized this young and brave god of space-time. With this, the entire world once again stepped onto the right track, entering a brand new era. The era ruled by Cronus. Oh, my children, you have done it. You have accomplished a great feat and ended that painful era. As everything came to an end, Gaia, covered in scars, stepped out from the earth. She hadn't appeared before because she had been using the mountain peaks to resist the sky that was constantly pressing down, attempting to destroy everything. If not for her obstruction, the 12 titans would not have been able to fight Uranus and emerge victorious. Her appearance instantly ignited the atmosphere. Though the 12 titans were more or less injured, they were now genuinely happy from the bottom of their hearts. They no longer had to suffer oppression and torture from the God King, nor did they have to worry about being imprisoned in the abyss of Tartarus one day. They were finally free. They began to celebrate their victory in battle and congratulate Cronus on his ascension as the new king. You are right, our great and beloved mother. This is indeed something worth celebrating. Cronus was still thinking about Uranus's unspoken final curse, but in this moment, facing everyone's congratulations, he could only suppress it in his heart for now and force a smile. They returned to the divine mountain and began a banquet lasting dozens of days to celebrate this brand new era. While the gods celebrated recklessly because they had finally escaped their long-standing torment, the new god king, Cronus, the god of space-time, quietly sought out Gaia, Mother Earth. Great and respected Mother Goddess, I believe you saw in the final battle that Uranus, the god of the sky, cast a vicious curse upon me. However, because His Highness Talon interrupted him, he did not speak it aloud. Cronus looked sorrowful, his eyes filled with worry. But even so, I still feel the power of a curse upon me. Why is this? Was the curse not interrupted? Gaia looked at her youngest child, who made her proud, and hearing his worries, she couldn't help but sigh softly. Cronus, my dear child, the moment Uranus used all his strength to curse you, the curse was established. Even His Highness Talon could not stop it. Didn't you notice? His Highness Talon said, fate is unspeakable, at that time. This exactly proves that the curse has become fate, and only things that must come to pass are considered fate. Super comprehensive, all-hand typed, error-free station. Hearing Gaia's explanation, Cronus's heart, which had been hanging in suspense, finally died completely. Yet, still unwilling to give up, he asked, my beloved Mother Goddess, is there any way to revoke this curse? Although he didn't know the specific content of the curse, Cronus could clearly feel the hatred Uranus had for him at that time, so it must be a very vicious curse. Gaia looked at him with pity, her tone filled with sympathy. My poor child, that curse issued by the god of the sky in his rage with all his power will surely come to pass, no matter what influence it receives. Because contracts are rules set at the beginning of the world's creation. The reason the gods can gather and follow the God King's commands is precisely because of the binding power of contracts. And a curse is a form of contract power. Therefore, a curse issued by a high-level deity is simply impossible to resist. After hearing Gaia's explanation, the last trace of hope in Cronus's heart vanished completely. He let out a long sigh, his brow clouded with sorrow. I must find out what the content of the curse is so that I can take precautions. Cronus thought to himself, and an idea formed in his mind. He planned to visit His Highness Talon again after the divine banquet ended. As a suspected god of fate, he believed Talon must know the content of Uranus's final curse. Gaia looked at the preoccupied Cronus and couldn't help but frown, yet she still patiently tried to comfort him. Unfortunately, Cronus was unable to listen to anything now, so it had little effect. After going through the events of the first-generation god King Uranus, Gaia was physically and mentally exhausted. She was unwilling to get too involved in the affairs between the gods anymore. Seeing that Cronus wasn't listening to her, she simply stopped speaking. Cronus was not yet a true god king, he could only be considered the leader chosen by the gods. However, with the position of god king vacant in this world, the leader of the gods was barely qualified. Therefore, the will of the world would eventually recognize him completely. He just needed a little more time, and he would eventually become as powerful as Uranus. But at least for now, he had not yet become fully powerful. Thus, he would feel fear and worry, unable to be as confident as the naturally powerful Uranus, who was confident to the point of arrogance. Thus, in the end, Uranus also lost because of his own arrogance. In comparison, Cronus, the second-generation god king, was much more cautious. However, these were not things Talon would care about. While the gods were immersed in celebration for defeating the first-generation god king, Talon also returned to his own void space to rest and recover. Because he had forcibly used the power of fate once to stop Uranus from speaking the curse, his divine power was now significantly depleted and might take quite some time to recover. However, he believed that the benefits of doing so definitely outweighed the drawbacks. As the god of fate, in order to maximize his interests, Talon naturally had to push fate himself. If he had really let Uranus speak the final curse, it would have had nothing to do with him. What a troublesome fellow. If you're going to curse, just curse. Why bother saying it aloud? Talon thought with some dissatisfaction. Talon had always disliked Uranus, the first-generation god king. If the subsequent second and third-generation god kings were absurd but at least somewhat rational, then Uranus, the first, was purely arrogant, finding pleasure in torturing others. But that wasn't the most critical point. The most critical point was that Uranus always held a tight grip on the right to procreate, not allowing any god other than himself to have offspring. And because of a prophecy, he not only stopped procreating but also stuffed already born gods back into the womb. When he took that action, he was destined to be overthrown. Because the lack of new gods meant no new rules for this world, which in turn meant it could not continue to evolve and develop. This went against the will of the world, chaos. Talon was also affected by this. As the god in control of fate, seeing only a handful of gods in the entire world, barely a few individuals when counted, how could that be acceptable? Without life, where would fate come from? And how could he become powerful? So he decided to intervene and push things along, ending the stagnant rule of the first-generation god king early. If not for him, Uranus would have been at least 1,000 years away from being overthrown. He didn't want to wait that much longer. Now, Talon only hoped that Cronus, the second-generation god king, would be more capable, properly refine the world, and create more life. Just as he was thinking this, his gaze suddenly turned toward the void. A distinguished guest was hurrying over to visit. It was none other than the second-generation god king, Cronus. Even more urgent than I imagined, Talon murmured softly, a slight smile playing on his lips. It seems he cares quite a lot about this curse. This divine banquet, celebrating the victory of the battle and the arrival of a new era, lasted for a full month. Once the Titans had all been sent away, Cronus did not hesitate for a moment, he immediately left the divine mountain and hurried to this void. Just as when he had come here last time, Talon was still dressed in his white robes, waiting quietly. Those purple eyes, filled with a mysterious aura, gazed at him gently, as if he had long anticipated his arrival. Cronus did not become disrespectful after becoming the new god king. On the contrary, he became even more polite and respectful toward Talon. Even though the other's divine power appeared so insignificant, as if he were no match for him at all, Cronus knew that beneath that weak exterior lay a power that was unfathomable. That was the power of fate. In the world of chaos, as long as a being was alive, it could not escape the influence of fate, not even the god king. This was where Cronus was smarter than Uranus. He would frankly acknowledge his own shortcomings and then find ways to resolve them. He looked at Talon and asked in a humble and respectful voice, "Respected Lord Talon, I apologize for intruding upon you once again. His Majesty the God King, you need not be so polite." Talon responded with a smile. His expression as gentle as always, like a kind elder. "Is there a reason you have chosen to come to me instead of governing the divine court?" Cronus knew the other was feigning ignorance, but he answered seriously, "I wish to know what the final curse of the god of the sky, Uranus, was. Only by knowing the content of the curse can I better deal with it. I believe you must know, Lord. Would you be able to tell me?" Facing this question, Talon was not in the least bit surprised. He sighed softly and looked at the young god king before him with a pitying gaze. "His Majesty the God King, I do not advise you to ask about this." "Why?" Cronus frowned. Without a hint of displeasure, he asked earnestly, "Lord Talon, please enlighten me." The moment the curse was spoken, it became fate, and a prophecy is the anchoring of fate. The fact that you know this means that it also knows you. I stepped forward to interrupt Uranus's curse at the time. Although the curse still clung to you, the final outcome was not necessarily unchangeable. But if you know the outcome, then it can no longer be changed. And when the result is destined, all actions taken by any existence cannot stop its arrival. They might even become the driving force for that result to come to pass. Listening to Talon's slow, deliberate explanation, the expression of the young god king, Cronus, became incredibly complex. Finally, Talon looked at Cronus seriously and asked in return, "In that case, do you still wish to know the content of this curse?" Cronus opened his mouth, but for a long time, he could not speak. Talon's meaning was clear. Once he knew the content of the curse, it would no longer be fate choosing him, but him choosing this fate. As the saying goes, the price of a prophecy is the prophecy itself. Cronus found himself unable to make a decision for a moment. He was already afflicted by the curse. He wanted to know its content to take precautions, but Talon said that once known, it could never be stopped. But if he did not know, he could not even take precautions, which also meant he could not stop it. This was truly a very difficult dilemma. Talon watched Cronus hesitate and struggle in this way, calm and without the slightest impatience. The personalities of the two generations of god kings were different, which led to changes in his rhetorical strategy. Uranus was arrogant and conceited, so telling him directly was the best method. Not only would he not take offense, he would even scoff at it. Conversely, if Talon did not say it, it would be viewed as a provocation. Cronus was more cautious, even cautious to the point of suspicion, so Talon had to explain the nature of prophecy clearly to him to avoid being troubled by this god king later, once he regained his composure. Anyway, he had made things clear now. If Cronus still insisted on knowing, he could not be blamed later. Moreover, he believed that with Cronus's cautious and suspicious nature, if he did not know the content of the curse, he would likely be unable to eat or sleep in peace. Compared to the unknown that he could not control, he probably preferred to know everything and take precautions early, because he was a courageous titan. This courage would make him dare to face fate. Evasion was something only cowards would do, and Cronus had always been synonymous with bravery, regardless of whether this bravery was smart. The facts were just as Talon had guessed. After a long period of hesitation, Cronus finally gritted his teeth, made up his mind, and said, "Respected Lord Talon, I still wish to know the content of the curse." The smile in Talon's eyes flashed and vanished. He put on a troubled expression and sighed deeply, appearing very reluctant, yet helpless. "Since you insist, then as you wish. The final curse of the god of the sky, Uranus, is, you shall be cast down from the divine altar by your children. Tartarus shall become your hell, and all the titans who have helped you shall also suffer such a curse." The expression on Cronus's face turned completely grim. Even though he clearly knew that given Uranus's hatred for him, this curse would be incredibly malicious, he still had not expected it to be of such content. Taking a deep breath, Cronus forced himself to calm down. He pulled a forced smile at Talon and asked with difficulty, "O great god of fate, respected Lord Talon, I know this is rude, but I will give you an absolutely generous compensation, along with the one condition I promised you earlier. I wish to request that you make one more prophecy, a prophecy about me. I want to know if this curse will ultimately come to pass, and what my ending will be. Will I have a chance to resolve this curse in the future?" Talon's gaze grew increasingly pitying, like a kind elder looking at a stubborn child. Seeing that Cronus was very insistent, he sighed. "Your father once asked me the same words. In a trance, I seem to see your father's shadow upon you, and I shall give you the same answer. There is nothing eternal in this world, not even royal power. How you obtained all of this is how you shall lose all of this." Wealth and honor are sought in danger, and are also lost in danger. Those deep purple eyes gazed calmly at Cronus, and he spoke word by word. What has been will be again, and what has been done will be done again. That's the end of part 1. Part 2 is coming soon.
Thanks for watching. Please subscribe and support our channel for more stories. Hello guys, welcome to Fanfiction Audiobook. Here you find original fan-made audio stories. Enjoy the journey into new worlds.
Greek mythology. I awakened as a divine prophet. Part 2. Listening to Talon's final prophecy, Cronus fell into silence. Talon observed him with interest, wondering what his ultimate reaction would be. Although Cronus became the second-generation god king because of his courage, his control over the world and his kingly authority were the weakest among the 3 generations of god kings. He was neither like the third-generation god king Zeus, who grasped all authority through wisdom and tactics to become the undisputed lord of the gods, nor like the first-generation god king Uranus, who possessed absolute crushing power and patriarchal authority over the gods. Furthermore, due to Talon's involvement, Uranus's era ended prematurely. Cronus had not grown enough, and it wouldn't be an exaggeration to call him the weakest god king. If Talon hadn't set a trap for the powerful ocean god Oceanus beforehand, resolving this potential greatest threat for Cronus, it would be uncertain who would be the god king now. Although he would gradually gain more power as the world recognized him, eventually reaching the great creative power of a god king with the world's blessing, that day was still far off. At least for now, he was far from reaching that level. Precisely because he was not strong enough, he would not and could not be as tyrannical and dictatorial as Uranus. Lacking sufficient martial power, he would rely more on his wits. This was the reason for his cautious personality, which bordered on paranoia. During his era of rule, the Chaos world would usher in a feudal system where other titans were absolute masters in their respective domains, to the point where they might follow Cronus's orders but not his summons. In this situation, knowing the curse and prophecy about himself, what would Cronus do? Cronus knew Talon was watching him, so he didn't stay silent for long, partly because he feared Talon might find him rude, and partly because he didn't want Talon to see what he was thinking. He no longer dwelled on that prophecy, at least on the surface, and instead asked about Talon's request. Respected Lord Talon, I promised you a condition before. I wonder if you have decided on it. Talon nodded and said with a smile, my condition is simple, great God King. You and your brothers should do your best to create more life for this world. This world is so vast, yet its rules are incomplete. Therefore, we need more deities and more life, only then will the world become increasingly prosperous. And this will also count as your achievement as the God King, earning you more recognition from the world. Cronus never expected Talon's condition to be this, which caught him completely by surprise. Following the castration of Uranus, who became God King through paternal authority, the era of gaining power through patriarchy came to an end. This change was like how, initially, the person with the most children in a tribe became king. In the second generation, it became the person who contributed the most to the tribe, had prestige, and had matriarchal support. By the third generation, it would depend on recruitment, conspiracy, wisdom, and having the most supporters, but that's a story for later. When the first generation ended, the right to procreate was no longer exclusive to the God King but returned to all life. Even if Talon hadn't said anything, Cronus believed his brothers and sisters would give birth to one new god after another. Because this was also a way to enhance one's own strength, when 2 inherent laws fused to give birth to a new law, the titans would become stronger in their respective domains. Sensing Cronus's confusion, Talon added with a chuckle, life doesn't necessarily have to be divine. He subtly hinted, perhaps you can use your imagination to create some other creatures. Don't you think a world with only gods is too monotonous? Hearing this, Cronus was instantly moved. He nodded thoughtfully, indicating he understood. Seeing that the guidance was successful, Talon did not detain him further and found an excuse to send the young god king away. Cronus felt that since he had agreed to Talon's condition and indeed wanted to do something for the world to gain recognition and power sooner. Instead of returning directly to the Divine Mountain, he went to visit his other Titan brothers. As he expected, his Titan brothers had no intention of giving up on nurturing new divine authorities and were already actively taking action. However, Cronus still subtly expressed his hope for more life to be born into the world, stating that this life need not be limited to deities. Not knowing what kind of life Talon wanted, he simply let everyone brainstorm. The other Titans were also inspired by his words, feeling that the world was indeed a bit dull, and began to research new life on their own. They created all sorts of strange mythical creatures, and from the elemental forces they wielded, many spirits and various nymphs were born. These creatures, symbolizing natural forces, became life forms in the chaos world besides the gods, though their numbers were not large compared to the vastness of the world. Oceanus, who had also been inspired by Talon previously, felt as if he had gained some insight upon hearing Cronus's words. Although he didn't know exactly what benefits procreation brought, having been reminded repeatedly, he decided to comply. Thus, he and Tethys together sired 3,000 Oceanids and 3,000 river god. This, 3,000, was not an exact number but represented infinity. They gave birth to all the rivers in the world, and the Oceanids brought countless vitality to the previously desolate ocean stream. The most direct benefit of doing so soon manifested. The ocean stream encircling the entire world grew even more massive. This meant that Oceanus's divine authority and power had achieved breakthrough growth. Not only did his injuries from the previous battle against the first-generation god King Uranus heal rapidly, but his water-based divine authority even showed signs of surpassing the primordial sea god Pontus. Having tasted the benefits, Oceanus finally understood the true meaning of procreation, and worked even harder. Seeing this, the other titans vied to imitate him. Their unions resulted in new rules that were mostly extensions of their own authorities. And these extensions could also strengthen themselves. Under these circumstances, the gods were more than willing to engage in this activity of creating gods. The chaos world, whose evolution had paused due to Uranus's monopolistic rule, finally entered a stage of stable and rapid development. Countless third-generation gods were born during this period. Because resources were abundant, there wasn't much scheming among the gods, and with no competition between them, the world enjoyed a rare peace. Later generations would call this era the Golden Age. For eternal gods, time is the least valuable thing, and in the blink of an eye, several centuries had passed. Cronus, guided by Talon, led the other titans in creating life. This was indeed a great achievement. As the chaos world developed rapidly, it also increasingly recognized this new god king. Cronus could clearly feel his power growing stronger. With the world's blessing, the speed of his divine power's growth even surpassed that of Oceanus, who had sired countless offspring. This increase in strength finally gave him some confidence. At least he no longer had to constantly worry that his brothers, those titans stronger than him, would pose a threat. During the centuries of his hard work, his god-queen, Rhea, the goddess of fertility and time, had always been by his side, and the affection between them was incredibly sincere. One day, atop the majestic divine mountain, God-Queen Rhea found God King Cronus, filled with an indescribable excitement. Rhea appeared as a very beautiful and exquisite young woman. At this moment, with joy overflowing from her eyes and brows, she seemed all the more vibrant and stunning. Looking at Rhea like this, Cronus couldn't help but smile a bit more as he reached out to pull his beautiful wife into his embrace. "Oh, my beautiful God Queen, what has happened to make you so happy? Great God King, my love, this is definitely something that will make you happy as well," Rhea said with a smile, stroking her flat belly with immense happiness, her voice full of sweetness. "We are finally going to have offspring too." The smile on Cronus's face froze. He widened his eyes in disbelief, and because he was so shocked, he couldn't even control his expression for a moment. However, Rhea was completely immersed in happiness and sweetness at this moment and did not notice Cronus's abnormality. Ever since he had learned of Uranus's curse and the prophecy about himself from Talon centuries ago, Cronus had been doing everything in his power to delay the arrival of this curse. The curse said he would be overthrown by his own child, so he tried his best not to be intimate with Rhea, fearing she would give birth to his offspring. But this was only temporary. As the God King and Rhea as the God Queen, they were destined to bear children. This was the will of the world, and they could not resist it. All of Cronus's efforts were merely to make this day come later and later, so that he would have enough time to find a way to deal with it. And when this day truly arrived, Cronus found to his panic that he was far from ready. It had only been a few hundred years, he wasn't strong enough yet, and the will of the chaos world had not fully recognized him. How could Rhea be pregnant at a time like this? Looking at the beautiful young woman in his arms, who had already begun to envision the appearance of their future child, Cronus only felt a chill throughout his body, almost unable to control his emotions. In his mind, he constantly recalled Uranus's final resentful gaze and Talon's flat, emotionless voice. What has been will be again, what has been done will be done again. When Cronus didn't speak for a long time, Rhea looked up in confusion and asked, "What's wrong?" "His Majesty the God King, we finally have our own child. Aren't you happy?" Rhea did not know the contents of the curse, nor did she know what Cronus was afraid of or worried about. She was simply envious seeing her other Titan siblings bear many offspring over these centuries. Now that she finally had her own child, she naturally felt happy, yet she was puzzled by Cronus's reaction. Meeting Ray's questioning gaze, Cronus forced a smile and spoke with difficulty. No, my love, I am very happy. I'm just surprised because this is a bit sudden. It's already been several hundred years, Your Majesty, it's time we had a child, Rhea said with a smile. It will surely be a healthy and intelligent child, and as brave as you. Cronus's eyelids twitched at her words. He no longer had the heart to continue the conversation, so he found an excuse to send Rhea away and then sat alone in the vast temple, silent for a very long time. In the quiet hall, Cronus seemed to have turned into a lifeless stone statue. The final resentful gaze of the previous god king, Uranus, had always been like a thorn stuck in Cronus's heart, never having been pulled out all these years. He could only try his best to ignore the existence of that thorn, but today, he was still pricked until he was dripping with blood. I cannot just wait for the curse to descend. I must do something. Finally, after an unknown amount of time, Cronus ultimately made up his mind and decided to take action, for he was the most courageous god king, and passive waiting had never been his style. Cronus left the divine mountain and came upon the earth, arriving at the residence of Mother Earth Gaia. Since the end of the previous god king Uranus's reign, Gaia had stopped interfering in the affairs of the gods, returning instead to the earth to slowly recover the essence she had consumed over the years. Gaia was surprised by Cronus's visit, but she received him nonetheless and took the initiative to ask. My child, the great god King Cronus, have you come to see me for something? Cronus hesitated, not knowing how to begin, but in the end, his fear of the curse prevailed. He told Gaia in detail about the curse and then requested that Gaia remove the child in the goddess of time Ray's womb, to prevent his descendants from overthrowing his divine authority. Mother Earth Gaia's greatest authority was the right of fertility. Making a child already conceived disappear was something only she could do in this world. This was the solution Cronus had spent days thinking of. As long as he had no offspring, the curse would never be fulfilled. But upon hearing this, Gaia became furious. Her dark brows furrowed as she said sharply, Cronus, have you forgotten why your father Uranus was driven from his throne? He stuffed the children I had already given birth to back into my body. One who violates the laws of fertility is unworthy of being the god king, and a god who cannot produce offspring is even less qualified to be the leader of the gods. Cronus, put away your ridiculous ideas. Not only will I not withdraw Ray's child, I will bless her. She will certainly give birth to your child. Having said that, Gaia directly drove Cronus out of the temple, giving him no chance to speak. Cronus looked at the door closed tightly before him, a bitter expression appearing on his face, but there was nothing he could do about it. Time flew by. Hundreds of years had passed since Cronus last sought a prophecy from Talon. During this time, Talon remained in the void, feeling his divine power grow rapidly. Compared to the world ruled by the first god king, Uranus, hundreds of years ago, the world now had many more life forms. Although these lives still seemed sparse compared to the vast land, it was no longer as empty as it once was. The most direct benefit of this was that Talon's divine power grew faster. It had now completely stabilized at the level of medium divine power, no longer in the unstable state of having barely broken through centuries ago. He thought he would continue to wait, at least until Cronus committed some rebellious act out of fear of the curse, before stepping out of the endless void to find a way to intervene. Unexpectedly, Rhea had only just become pregnant, the child hadn't even been born, and Cronus hadn't had time to do anything yet when an invitation was delivered to the void. The invitation came from the ocean god, Oceanus. He invited the gods to a divine banquet he was organizing to celebrate the birth of his beloved daughter, Métis. Because of hints from Talon and Cronus, Oceanus had fathered the most children among all the Titans. However, not every child possessed a powerful priesthood. Most were just ordinary river gods and ocean goddesses, holding very little authority over the water element. Yet, among so many children, a few exceptional ones were bound to be born, such as Styx, the head of the Oceanids. Styx, the goddess of oaths and the personification of the river Styx in the underworld, her daughter is Nike, the goddess of victory. And Clymene, who married the Titan Iapetus, and others were among the more famous and powerful of Oceanus's many children. However, the laws governed by these goddesses were still inferior to those of the newly born Métis. Métis, the goddess of wisdom and strategy. Her very existence symbolized wisdom, and wisdom has always been one of the most important laws. Thus, this beautiful girl gained the love of Oceanus and Tethys as soon as she was born. The joyful ocean god immediately invited the gods to a banquet to celebrate Métis' birth, simply to express his excitement. Talon hadn't expected to be invited, but on second thought, it made sense. He had visited Oceanus before, and they had a slight acquaintance. To show respect and courtesy, Oceanus had to extend an invitation. Talon didn't hesitate long before deciding to attend. He was quite interested in Métis, the goddess of wisdom. After all, she was the first wife of the third-generation god king, Zeus, and a crucial helper who would assist Zeus in overthrowing Cronus to become the third god king. Although this goddess's ultimate fate wasn't great, being swallowed by Zeus and merging with him, she still gave birth to the famous Athena, the goddess of wisdom and war, from within Zeus's body. And such a deity, whose fate would influence the entire world's layout, was exactly what Talon favored. However, by the time he arrived at the ocean stream by his familiar route, many gods had already arrived. Most were third-generation gods. Few of the 12 titans had come, most only sending their offspring. Surprisingly, however, the god king Cronus had actually come to the banquet. Cronus came purely because he was depressed after being rejected by Mother Earth, Gaia. Since he hadn't yet decided how to face the pregnant Rhea and didn't want to return to the divine mountain, he happened to receive the invitation and simply came to the ocean stream. To his surprise, he actually encountered Talon here. Seeing the gentle youth who looked exactly like the image in his memory, Cronus's eyes lit up instantly. He immediately wanted to ask how to handle his current situation and wanted a few more prophecies. But seeing the other gods passing by, Cronus ultimately restrained the impulse. He merely greeted Talon with polite courtesy, showing none of the arrogance a god king should have. Not only Cronus, but the host of the banquet, the ocean god Oceanus, also gave Talon a warm welcome. He seemed even more enthusiastic than he was toward the god king, and Cronus unexpectedly showed no dissatisfaction. It was as if it should be so, as if it were only natural. Almost none of the third-generation gods present had seen Talon before. Seeing the god king and Oceanus being so polite to a being with medium divine power, they were instantly filled with curiosity, and whispers began to break out. Mother, who is he? A half-grown youth leaned curiously toward his mother. On his young and tender face, the most striking feature was a pair of clear and bright eyes, as if they could see through all illusions and never be deceived. I don't know who he is, but Prometheus, can you not see his origin? The youth's mother couldn't help but feel surprised. This beautiful mother was Clymene, the Oceanid who had married the Titan Iapetus. She and the Titan Iapetus had 4 children in total. Prometheus was her favorite child because of his cleverness, so she had brought him along on this trip back to the ocean stream. Because he was born with foresight, Prometheus could always predict many things that would happen in the future and could use this ability to know the future of many people. Clymene, also a third-generation god, had never seen Talon. She simply assumed that a god with medium divine power wasn't a powerful existence, and Prometheus's ability should have been able to see through him. So when Prometheus said he couldn't see through him, she felt surprised. If the Titan Iapetus were here, he would surely recognize Talon and tell his beautiful wife Clymene that divine power sometimes represents nothing. Because the incident where Talon interrupted the full-strength curse of the first god king Uranus with just one sentence was deeply engraved in the memory of every Titan present at the time. And back then, he wasn't even as strong as he was now. But unfortunately, he wasn't there and hadn't come to the banquet, so the mother and son were completely baffled by their confusion. I like him very much, Prometheus said softly to his mother. He has an aura that feels very familiar to me, making me instinctively want to get close to him, to approach him. Mother, may I go and greet him? Clymene was even more surprised. She knew that some gods would naturally feel close to each other because their priesthoods were similar. But Prometheus's priesthood was the very rare foresight, prophecy. Could this unknown stranger also have a similar priesthood? However, Clymene didn't think much of it in the end. She didn't believe a god with medium divine power was anything to be cautious about. Her husband was a great titan, after all. Moreover, Prometheus wanted to be friendly, which was an attempt to make an ally rather than an enemy, so it was even less worth worrying about. With this in mind, she smilingly granted Prometheus's request. Talon saw the newly born Métis in a magnificent and exquisite crib. She was truly a beautiful and lovely child, with fair, delicate skin and exquisite features. Her large, round, gem-like eyes sparkled brightly. She curiously observed the god who was friendly teasing her, letting out a constant stream of pleasant giggles. Unlike the 12 titans who were born in adult form, most third-generation gods are born as infants, requiring decades or even hundreds or thousands of years to grow to their peak state. A deity's appearance mostly reflects their divine power. Childhood and adolescence represent a need for growth, while reaching their peak results in a youthful adult appearance. If their source is damaged or their strength declines, their appearance will age. This also meant that Talon's strength had never reached its peak, as he had maintained the appearance of a youth from his birth until now. Having lived through the reign of the first God King, his strength had risen 2 levels from weak divine power to medium divine power, yet his appearance had not changed at all. Furthermore, he had a feeling that even if he grew to possess great divine power, his appearance would likely remain unchanged. Because he was bound to the fate of this world, reaching his true peak would only be possible once the world truly flourished. Currently, it was only in the starting stages, and the road to growth remained long and difficult. She is truly very lovely, isn't she? Tethys, sitting by the crib, looked at her daughter with a soft maternal glow on her face, her eyes filled with undisguised affection. Talon nodded and praised, she will surely be a very popular goddess in the future. Tethys became even more delighted. As a mother, nothing was more pleasing than hearing her child being praised, especially when the praise came from Talon. Just as she was about to say a few more words to Talon, a slightly youthful voice interrupted their conversation. She is so beautiful, but beautiful things are always coveted. In the future, it would be best to be careful of the male gods coming from the land. Both Tethys and Talon were stunned by the voice. They turned around simultaneously to see a bright-eyed youth standing behind them at some unknown time, offering them a brilliant smile. Prometheus, why have you run here? Where is your mother? Tethys was surprised at first, but soon a helpless smile appeared. She was quite fond of this clever and quick-witted grandson of hers. Mother is outside, Prometheus said. At the same time, he looked at Talon without any reservation, his eyes shimmering with curiosity. Grandmother, which esteemed deity is this? I feel a sense of kinship just by looking at him. I wonder if I might have the honor of an introduction. Tethys was momentarily stunned by these words but quickly realized the reason. The power of a prophet's foresight is subordinate to fate, and since Talon was suspected to be the god of fate, it was perfectly normal for Prometheus, a being of foresight, to feel a sense of closeness. She first peeked at Talon and, seeing that he wasn't offended or displeased by Prometheus's sudden arrival but instead showed an interested expression, she introduced him with a smile. This is His Highness Talon, an ancient existence. You, naughty child, must be serious and respectful. Tethys did not dare to state Talon's divine office directly, so she could only use the vague term, ancient existence, though Prometheus did not mind. The boy nodded quickly. Because he was still young, he looked like a half-grown child. Talon observed him with interest, not at all averse to the contact. As mentioned before, Talon held a special fondness for beings whose fates would influence the overall structure of the world. However, before he could exchange more than a few words, the god King Cronus and the ocean god Oceanus came to find him, humbly expressing that they sought his guidance on a certain matter. Talon was somewhat surprised but did not refuse. But as he was about to leave with the two, the bold Prometheus pleaded with Tethys to let him come along. Tethys was quite conflicted. Oceanus was just about to scold this inconsiderate grandson when he was interrupted by Talon's laughter. If he wants to go, let him come along, Talon said. I share a certain affinity with this child. Since he had spoken, Oceanus could say nothing more and had to let Tethys bring Prometheus along. The god King Cronus said nothing from beginning to end, acting as if he were merely a passerby watching a show. Talon soon learned what matter they sought his guidance on. It was the remains left behind by the first god king, Uranus. Back then, under Talon's reminder, Oceanus had injected the feminine power of the ocean and water systems into those remains, completely neutralizing the masculine essence within and turning the flesh into countless dreamlike bubbles. However, those bubbles had not disappeared, and under the nourishment of the ocean stream over these hundreds of years, something was faintly beginning to be born. After all, since it concerned the first god king Uranus, Oceanus was somewhat uneasy. He wanted Talon to take a look and confirm that nothing dangerous would be born to threaten the ocean stream. The god king Cronus was equally uneasy, so he followed along to see and hear what Talon would say. Talon merely smiled at this and said in a warm voice, Great god king, esteemed lord of the ocean stream, there is no need for concern. Uranus, the god of the sky, has been completely ended and will never return. And these remains he left behind will not turn into anything harmful to the world. Under the nourishment of feminine power, in a little more time, a beautiful goddess will be born. Hearing that it would be a goddess, both Cronus and Oceanus were relieved. In the current system of divine authority, female deities were not eligible to become god kings and generally did not pose a threat to the world. Thank you for your answer, Your Highness Talon, Oceanus said, a smile appearing as he gave his sincere thanks. It is no matter. Since I am here and we share an affinity, I shall grant her a blessing. As Talon spoke, he looked at the dreamlike bubbles on the sea's surface and gave a sincere blessing. O goddess soon to be born, you shall possess the most beautiful appearance in the world, you shall be the incarnation of perfection. The bubbles on the sea surface floated gently, as if thanking Talon for his generous blessing. Talon smiled and then departed with Cronus and Oceanus. Seeing this, Tethys prepared to leave with Prometheus, but she heard the half-grown boy say with some confusion, "Why only bless beauty, and not innocence and chastity?" Tethys found it somewhat amusing and said helplessly, "Innocence and chastity are things all goddesses naturally possess, they require no blessing." Prometheus frowned and argued in a low voice, that might be because they do not have the most perfect appearance. However, Tethys only treated it as a child's nonsense and did not take the words to heart. At this moment, she was completely unaware of the gravity of the matter. The banquet hosted by Oceanus soon came to an end, and Talon returned to his own void. He didn't take the chance encounter with Prometheus, the god of foresight, to heart. Regardless of what impact this god of foresight might have on the world in the future, he was still too young now, having been born barely 100 years ago, a mere infant among gods. However, precisely because he was still young, he felt an instinctive urge to be close to Talon due to the proximity of their divine authorities. This was purely instinctual. Once he grew a bit more, such instincts would no longer affect him. But for now, he was still influenced. Thus, the first thing Prometheus did upon returning to his residence was to seek out his father, the Titan Iapetus. He wanted information about Talon. His brief contact with Talon had made him realize how special the deity was. His foresight told him that frequent contact with Talon would bring him many benefits. Because he was young and could not yet fully master his divine authority, Prometheus didn't know what those so-called benefits were in that vague sensation, but it was precisely the unknown that was most alluring. When the Titan Iapetus heard Prometheus's inquiry, his expression became quite peculiar. "You are saying you met His Highness Talon in the ocean stream, felt a desire to be close to him, and your foresight tells you that contacting him will be very beneficial." "Respected father, I indeed have such a feeling," Prometheus said, his face showing a hint of anticipation. "Can you tell me of his origins and background?" Also because of his foresight, Prometheus knew his father was aware of everything, which was why he came specifically to ask. The Titan Iapetus looked deeply at his son, who was always known for his cleverness, and fell into hesitation and uncertainty. He did indeed know about Talon. Like the other titans, he suspected Talon was the god of fate rather than the god of prophecy, but there was no evidence, only speculation. However, the other party's mystery and power were beyond doubt, even if his divine power didn't seem prominent, remaining only at the level of medium divine power after all these years. But after witnessing him use a tiny amount of power to interrupt the curse laid by the powerful god of the sky with all his might, all the titans understood one truth: sometimes, divine power does not represent everything. At the very least, back then, they who possessed great divine power couldn't even resist Uranus's desperate final struggle, let alone stop it. Thinking back to 1,000 years ago when Talon first appeared before them, he had only weak divine power. Yet even then, he had already prophesied the fall of the first-generation god-king. When everything happened exactly as he said, everyone finally realized that this was not something a mere prophecy could achieve. Naturally, feelings of wariness and fear were born. It had been centuries since the reign of the first god-king, Uranus, was ended. The 12 titans had no formal communication on the matter, yet they had reached a silent understanding: they would never speak of Talon's affairs. Even if they had faint suspicions in their hearts, they would never voice them. Because if the other party truly was the god of fate, Talon would surely sense it whenever they discussed or did anything involving him. Even though the 12 titans were the most powerful gods in the world besides the primordial gods after Uranus was finished, they were unwilling to offend Talon after witnessing his uniqueness. Under these circumstances, facing Prometheus's inquiry, it was hard for Iapetus not to hesitate. But soon he had a second thought. Prometheus had already met Talon, and Talon hadn't shown any displeasure. He even personally said they shared a fated connection. In this case, telling Prometheus should be fine. If possible, Iapetus naturally hoped to be on good terms with Talon, but unfortunately, he had few opportunities. If Prometheus could establish a good relationship, that would be quite good too. Thinking of this, Iapetus finally stopped hesitating. He told Prometheus in detail about what he had seen, the prophecies Talon had made that all came true, and some of his own guesses about Talon's identity. Finally, he warned with utmost seriousness: "Prometheus, you must never be disrespectful to His Highness Talon. He is an ancient existence worthy of respect. If he feels displeased because of your actions, I will personally punish you." Prometheus nodded hurriedly. Although he had a faint premonition that Talon's identity might not be simple, Prometheus still hadn't expected the other party's background to be so mysterious and powerful. He made a sincere and serious promise: "Respected father, please rest assured. I will never make His Highness Talon feel displeased. I will be extremely careful." Seeing Prometheus's proper attitude, Iapetus finally felt relieved, while also feeling a bit curious. How do you plan to approach His Highness Talon? He originally thought Prometheus would choose to visit the void, but to his surprise, Prometheus said, since His Highness Talon told the great god King Cronus that he hopes this world has more life, then I will start from that aspect. Iapetus was stunned and subconsciously frowned. Prometheus, what do you want to do? You are not yet powerful enough. Fathering offspring now will affect your divine authority. Prometheus didn't know whether to laugh or cry and quickly explained, no, respected father, I have no such intentions. I only want to help the great god King Cronus create more life. I already have some ideas. Iapetus then nodded with satisfaction, sighing in his heart that this was indeed his cleverest child. Once he was sure this wouldn't draw Talon's displeasure, he ignored it. Just as the Titan father and son finished their conversation, Talon, far away in the void at the edge of the world, sensed it. He could feel his own power of fate fluctuating slightly. This proved that someone in the world was mentioning him, or something was related to him. With just a slight investigation, Talon understood the cause and effect and couldn't help but chuckle. Prometheus actually wants to please me in such a way. But I must say, he is indeed very clever. This is exactly what I want to see most right now. This also fell under the category of fate being pushed forward because of him. Talon's divine power rose once again, and the increase was not small. This indicated that what was about to happen would not be a small matter for the entire world. The golden humans shouldn't be born because of this, right? If that's truly the case, then I'll have to think of how to reward him. Talon murmured to himself, becoming increasingly expectant of the upcoming developments. Having made up his mind, Prometheus soon arrived at the divine mountain to request an audience with the god king. Cronus had long heard of this second-generation titan, famous for his foresight and wisdom, and the two had only recently met in the ocean stream. Although Cronus was puzzled by Prometheus's request for an audience, he soon granted him an interview. Respected and great god king, please forgive Prometheus for taking the liberty of disturbing you. Prometheus bowed respectfully, maintaining a very humble posture. God of foresight, Prince Prometheus, there is no need to be so polite. Have you come to see me for something? Yes, His Majesty the God King. I learned from my father God that you wish for more life in the world. I happen to have some immature ideas and wanted to present them. Upon hearing this, Cronus felt a stir in his heart, wondering if Prometheus, the god of foresight, had received some fated inspiration, and his attitude became increasingly serious. Prince Prometheus, what ideas do you have? Your Majesty, don't you think there should be more intelligent life like us in this world? Prometheus said sincerely, the earth is too empty, and the previous creations of the gods ultimately lacked a bit of spirituality. Perhaps we should create some creatures like ourselves. They would not be gods and would have no divine authority, but they would possess wisdom. Hearing this, Cronus immediately fell into thought. He had previously felt the earth was too empty and had tried to create some creatures, but due to a lack of imagination, the resulting beings were always unsatisfactory. Prometheus's words gave him great inspiration. If he didn't know what kind of creatures to create, he could simply model them after the image of the gods. Only such life could better adorn the vast, empty earth. Thinking of this, he immediately praised Prometheus's idea and summoned the other gods, preparing to study and create life that was similar to gods but distinct from them. However, since these lives would live on the earth, Cronus first went to find Mother Earth Gaia and informed her of his thoughts truthfully. Gaia was also quite interested and even lent out her own life vase. It was a treasure vase with a thick aura of life, born when Gaia awoke from chaos. It was formed by the fusion of the eye of the spring of life in a clay jar refined from the world's first soil, making it the only divine artifact among the 5 primordial gods centered on nurturing. The spring water of life it contained held the seeds of all things. Watering the earth with it could bring forth life. This vase symbolized the manifestation of Gaia's divine office, directly linked to the laws of earthly order and life cycle. It had previously been kept at the top of the steps of Gaia's temple, symbolizing the supreme status of the divine authority of life. Having gained Gaia's support, Cronus no longer hesitated. Carrying the life vase and joining with the other Titan gods, he went out onto the empty earth. They used their own blood mixed with soil and the spring water from the life vase, spending several years to create many lives very similar to themselves in appearance. Their appearance was no different from that of the gods. They all had human forms, both male and female, with the men being robust and the women beautiful. But these lives were not gods, they merely possessed the privilege of coexisting with the gods. Looking at these newly born lives, many gods felt it was a novelty and bestowed blessings upon them one after another. Thus, these lives would no longer experience pain or aging, They could enjoy eternal feasts and happiness, and their deaths would be as peaceful as sleep. Furthermore, their bodies would remain forever young, and they had no need to labor. Because of Gaia's affection, the earth would automatically provide them with abundant fruit, and the seasons would be like a perpetual spring. These lives, likewise, were absolutely devout to the gods because of their creation and blessings, kneeling to express their submission and offering their most loyal respect. The gods were very satisfied with this. They enjoyed the worship of beings that looked just like them, which gave them a sense of being high above, making them feel more than ever that the creation of these creatures was a very correct thing. Because of the various blessings from the gods, these creatures had almost no worries. They lived together in harmony, with no conflict or sin. They were exactly what later generations recorded as the first generation of golden humans. Because they were so beautiful, they were even described as ornaments on the earth, being entirely the idealized creations of the gods. But because of their existence, the earth was finally no longer barren and empty. These lives built dwellings on the ground and would devoutly praise the gods every day. This made the gods even more satisfied. Cronus, who had created these lives, even received feedback from the world. The world's will, which already recognized him, acknowledged him even more. His divine power grew again, reaching the level of the primordial gods. He only needed a little more time to completely gain the world's recognition, become the true God King, and master the Genesis great power of the God King. This made him very happy, and he sincerely praised Prometheus for giving the idea. Prometheus, however, frowned as he looked at the created lives on the ground. He always felt that such lives did not match what he had imagined, because they were too perfect, they seemed somewhat unreal. However, he was still too weak now and lacked the ability to create on his own, having to rely on the hands of God King Cronus. Therefore, even if the created lives did not meet his expectations, he couldn't say much. While praising the greatness and wisdom of God King Cronus, he thought to himself that when he grew stronger, perhaps he could try to create on his own. But that day seemed very far away, so he just thought about it and buried the idea deep in his heart. After politely bidding farewell to the God King, he then went to the void outside the world, wanting to visit Talon. He knew that the other party was certainly aware of his actions, so he prepared to leave if Talon was unwilling to see him and think of other ways to curry favor later. If Talon was willing to see him, it would mean the other party was satisfied with this matter, and he could take the opportunity to make contact. The reality filled him with joy. As soon as he arrived in the void, he saw a figure in a white robe already waiting for him. The man was handsome, with a faint smile on his face, and his deep purple eyes were looking at him gently. It was Talon, who had sensed in advance that Prometheus would visit and had specifically waited there. Prince Talon. Prometheus suppressed the excitement in his heart, bowed seriously, and said in an incredibly sincere voice, "Prometheus has taken the liberty of disturbing you. You have done very well," Talon said with a smile. "The birth of humanity makes me very happy. Therefore, I intend to give you a gift. Is there anything you want? The creation of humans has pleased me, so I wish to reward you. Is there anything you desire?" Upon hearing this, Prometheus's first reaction was that Talon truly knew everything, and his second reaction was that the name of that life form was humans. Only then did he realize that Talon actually wanted to give him a gift. This instantly made him feel incredibly excited, but he still spoke with great restraint. "Respected Lord Talon, I only wished to please you and did not seek any reward. Being able to bring you joy is already an honor for Prometheus. Furthermore, I have always felt the world was too empty. The concept of humans existed long ago, and it was because of you that I had the courage to seek out the God King to attempt it. So, strictly speaking, it is I who should be thanking you." Prometheus was truly an incredibly intelligent deity, his words were flawless. Who could imagine that he was merely a child born only 100 years ago? Talon felt even more favorably towards such a self-aware prophet and said with a smile, "Your wisdom is worthy of the gift of fate. I will bestow upon you more authority as a prophet, and you shall become even more omniscient and omnipotent." Prophecy was inherently subordinate to fate. Talon only needed to give Prometheus a drop of the origin of fate to greatly enhance his prophetic abilities. Just like when the three fates were born, it only required a small bestowal. Prometheus's eyes lit up instantly. He could clearly feel a magical power merging into his body, and the prophetic visions that had previously been somewhat blurry became increasingly clear. Prometheus was instantly overcome with excitement, and he thanked Talon eagerly and sincerely for his generosity. After Talon waited for him to finish thanking him, his tone suddenly shifted, "But I must remind you, being a prophet is sometimes not a good thing. Do not become arrogant because of your foresight, think thrice before acting. Although Prometheus did not know why Talon said this, he nodded earnestly, indicating that he had taken the admonition to heart. Talon nodded in satisfaction and said with a smile, "Go back now. Your parents are looking for you, and we shall meet again very soon." Although Prometheus wanted to spend more time with him, upon hearing Talon say this, he politely chose to take his leave. He hurried back home and discovered that his father god and mother god were indeed looking for him. It turned out that not long ago, God Queen Rhea had given birth to a daughter. The birth of the first child in these hundreds of years made Rhea incredibly happy, so, following the example of Oceanus, she held a celebratory divine feast and invited the gods. After all, it was an invitation from the God Queen, and out of respect for the God King, the 12 titans generally had to attend. Third-generation gods like Prometheus certainly could not be absent. After finding Prometheus, they soon headed to the sacred mountain together. And the reason Talon said they would meet again soon was because Rhea had also invited him. Talon had not originally intended to go. He clearly knew who the child born this time was, Hestia, the goddess of the hearth and home, symbol of the eternal sacred fire and the warmth of the home. Compared to Métis, goddess of wisdom, Hestia's fate was not as turbulent. As the eldest sister of Zeus, she voluntarily gave up the position of a supreme deity, becoming the only recluse among the gods who did not participate in power struggles. Furthermore, she refused the courtship of other deities and swore to remain chaste forever. Talon had little interest in a deity whose fate was not particularly turbulent. However, because he had given Prometheus a gift and consumed some of his origin, Talon decided to go after all, though not to see Hestia. He planned to find a way to remind Cronus of the existence of the prophecy, thereby pushing the development of fate, which would increase his divine power and quickly compensate for his losses. Meanwhile, on the sacred mountain, the god king Cronus deeply experienced what it meant for joy to turn into sorrow. He had just been more recognized by the world for creating the golden humans and had gained more power, but upon returning to the sacred mountain, he discovered that Rhea had given birth to their child. It was a very cute girl, shrouded in a holy light, and her appearance was beautiful and exquisite. Rhea was very fond of this girl, and the other gods who came to congratulate her offered endless praise and blessings. Cronus listened to their praise for Hestia, saying things like she would surely be intelligent and very brave in the future, and only felt tightness in his chest, with indescribable emotions suppressing his heart. He could only console himself that fortunately, this was a goddess. Goddesses had no right of inheritance and could not pose a threat to his divine throne. Thinking this way, he felt a little better and could barely force a smile to deal with the gods. But what he never expected was that Rhea had actually invited Talon, and Talon had actually come in person. Seeing that familiar white figure appear in the divine palace, Cronus felt as if something had exploded in his mind, and an unspeakable fear spread in his heart. Talon, as the god of fate, had actually come in person to congratulate the birth of Hestia. Could there be something special about this girl? Cronus could not help but let his imagination run wild, even forgetting that not long ago, Talon had also gone to congratulate the birth of Métis, goddess of wisdom. His mind was filled with only one thought: Hestia would surely be very outstanding in the future, otherwise, Talon, as the god of fate, would not have come in person. And such an outstanding Hestia, even if she was a goddess without the right of inheritance, might still become a great helper to that rebellious child in the future who dared to overthrow his divine power. Just like Gaia once was. He knew clearly that back then, without Gaia's help, the 12 titans alone could not have overthrown the tyrannical rule of Uranus, they were still far too weak. Because of the fear buried deep in his heart, Cronus could not control himself from overthinking. He looked at the white figure slowly walking forward and felt that his guess was very likely. It must be so, otherwise Talon would not have come in person. It has been hundreds of years, and he had almost never left that void space. No, I must do something. I cannot just sit idly by and watch these rebels grow up and watch them challenge my divine power. Cronus said in his heart, and he suddenly calmed down. Those unknown fears, in this instant, all turned into the strength that firmed his resolve. On the other side, Talon, who had just walked into the divine palace, felt the divine power surging in his body and his expression became very strange. In just an instant, the loss he had sustained from giving the gift earlier had vanished, and his power had even increased. He had already achieved the purpose of his outing. But the problem is, he clearly hadn't done anything yet. Talon didn't know what had happened. Feeling the growth of divine power within his body and looking at the God King before him, who was greeting him politely with a smile, he felt a strange sensation. Clearly, he hadn't had time to do anything yet, but it felt as if everything had already been done. However, since his goal had been achieved, he didn't care to waste any more time here. He went to see the god Queen Rhea and the newly born Hestia, offered sincere praise for the beautiful girl, and took his leave after completing the formalities. God King Cronus did not see him out, as there were still many gods here for him to attend to. At this moment, his face was full of smiles. He chatted and laughed with the gods, generously accepting their blessings for the newborn child, completely devoid of his previous gloom, as if the person who had been frantic with fear before wasn't him at all. Seeing this, Ray's worried mood, stemming from her feeling that Cronus had seemed strange lately, also relaxed. The beautiful god queen speculated in her heart that perhaps Cronus had been in a bad mood before because his work as god king was too heavy, and now he was happy because of Hestia's birth. Because Hestia was so well behaved and lovely, Rhea felt that no parents in the world could reject such a perfect child. She grew increasingly fond of this angel-like baby girl. The divine banquet held for the celebration lasted for a full 7 days before ending. Once the gods departed, the vast divine mountain was soon left with only Cronus, Rhea, and the newborn infant, Hestia. Cronus found an excuse to send Rhea away. Because he showed no signs of abnormality, Rhea suspected nothing and was very easily sent away. When Cronus faced Hestia lying on the bed alone, he took a deep breath and drew his sickle without the slightest hesitation. That was the sickle he had once used to castrate the first-generation god king, Uranus. It was a divine artifact forged by the Cyclops within Mother Earth Gaia's body using 1,000 years of fury. And at this moment, Cronus aimed this sickle at his own daughter, Hestia, who was still an infant. Hestia was fast asleep on the bed. She was truly an incredibly delicate and lovely child. Her fair skin seemed thin enough to break at a touch, her long eyelashes cast a shadow under her eyelids, and her rosy lips were slightly pouted in a naive expression. 101 Reading, 101 Reading Network is super useful. 101kks.com awaits you for full manual error-free reading. Looking at such a child, Cronus's hand holding the sickle couldn't help but tremble slightly. He fell into an unspeakable conflict. He tried to persuade himself that goddesses had no right of succession and that Hestia was so well behaved that perhaps she would not become the rebel in the prophecy. But there was always another voice in the depths of his heart, the voice of the first-generation god king Uranus, filled with all his malice, saying, "Cronus, I shall curse you." These two completely different voices seemed to argue in his mind. Finally, as a white figure surfaced in his thoughts, both voices vanished simultaneously, and the hesitation in his eyes was ultimately replaced by resolve. That figure was none other than Talon, who had come to offer congratulations a few days ago. The god of fate, Talon, had come to congratulate Hestia's birth. This was undoubtedly the last straw that broke the camel's back. Cronus finally stopped hesitating. He raised the sickle high and swung it down heavily toward the infant girl with all his divine power. He wanted to kill Hestia to eliminate the future trouble forever. But he failed. Countless rays of pure holy light enveloped the sleeping infant, wrapping her tiny body completely and isolating her from all harm. The sickle that was sufficient to castrate a first-generation god king seemed to strike a pile of cotton. Cronus felt that his strength simply could not be exerted. Shock and anger flashed in Cronus's eyes. Refusing to believe it, he swung the sickle again, but he still could not harm the infant protected by the holy light in the slightest. The holy light enveloping Hestia was precisely the laws and divine authority she symbolized, which protected her from destruction. Gods cannot be killed, because their birth symbolizes the addition of a new law to the world. Once a law appears, it cannot be annihilated, even a god king cannot do so. Looking at the completely unaffected Hestia, Cronus for a moment didn't know what to do. Should he lock her in Tartarus? But locking her in Tartarus would definitely offend Gaia, because the abyss bordered the earth. She might even be stuffed into Gaia's body through the abyss, just like the Hecatoncheires and Cyclops back then. When he went to ask Gaia to take back this child last time, Gaia was already very angry. Cronus felt that if he really threw Hestia into the abyss of Tartarus, Gaia would definitely come looking for trouble. Furthermore, when he first became God King, Gaia had said to release the Hecatoncheires and Cyclops imprisoned in the abyss, but Cronus feared their terrifying power and refused Gaia's request. He had already had a rather unpleasant falling out with Gaia then, and this Mother Earth was no longer willing to visit the divine mountain. No, she cannot be imprisoned in Tartarus. Cronus took a deep breath, put away his sickle, and forced himself to calm down. When Rhea returned, what she saw was Cronus standing blankly in front of the infant girl. "My brave majesty, what are you thinking? Why do you look so troubled?" Rhea asked curiously. "Did Hestia just cry or fuss?" "No, she is very well behaved and has been sleeping all along," Cronus heard himself say. Rhea seemed to say something else after that, but Cronus could no longer hear her. His mind was filled only with what to do and how to deal with Hestia. She could not be killed and could not be imprisoned, yet he could not guarantee that she wouldn't become a member of the rebels helping to overthrow him when she grew up. This left Cronus in deep unease. He felt a sense of panic that he could not prevent the curse. He thought of Talin's words about how fate cannot be stopped. No, there must be another way, there must be another way. Think again, think carefully. Cronus kept comforting himself, and his gaze even involuntarily drifted toward Rhea. He wanted to stuff the child back into Rhea's body. As long as she hadn't been born, the curse would be considered terminated. But Gaia's previous words stopped him. The first generation god King Uranus had been overthrown for that very reason. If only she hadn't been born, can't stuff her back into Rhea. If only she hadn't been born, can't stuff her back into Rhea. These two thoughts kept repeating in Cronus's mind. Finally, his eyes lit up as he thought of an excellent solution. If he couldn't stuff her back into Rhea's body, he would just stuff her into his own. He was the child's father god, and he could likewise accommodate the child's laws. This way, he would not only devour the power, but the corresponding laws would still exist. Thinking of this, he was almost ecstatic. He lunged forward and grabbed the tiny Hestia. Under Rhea's terrified gaze, Cronus opened his massive mouth and swallowed the infant girl into his belly in one gulp. This scene was so appalling that Rhea, realizing what had happened, suddenly let out a scream of terror and grief. But Cronus seemed not to hear it. Feeling the rising divine power within him, he felt an unprecedented sense of peace. Cronus, who had been unable to close his eyes since Rhea became pregnant, finally slept soundly that night amidst Rhea's painful wails. Time passed quickly, and hundreds of years had already gone by since Cronus and the other gods created the golden humans. The once empty earth was now dotted with the figures of golden humans. These humans had no worries and did not need to concern themselves with survival. Their most frequent daily activity was praising the gods. The birth of these humans also prompted more laws to become perfected, the most obvious of which was order. This brings us to Themis, the goddess of law and justice. As one of the 12 titans, Themis's divine power had never been particularly prominent among the titans. Especially during the era ruled by the first generation god King Uranus, there was no order in the world, only tyranny and cruelty. Since the laws symbolized by this goddess of law and justice were not realized, she was naturally weak. With Uranus overthrown and a new era dawning, the gods ceased their fighting, but no one followed any corresponding laws, so Themis remained obscure. Until the birth of humanity. These beings, who shared the same appearance as gods but lacked their genesis great power and did not symbolize laws, possessed high intelligence equal to that of the gods. Themis observed the patterns of these humans and felt they were too scattered and lacked restraint, so she sought to extract a set of universal laws applicable to both gods and men. She had a premonition that if she could achieve this, her divine power would increase significantly, and it would greatly advance the development of the world. However, to do all this, she first needed the permission of the master of the world, the god King Cronus. Thus, Themis came to the divine mountain to request an audience with the god king. In mythology, Themis is depicted wearing a white robe with her eyes blindfolded, holding a scale in one hand and a sword in the other. The blindfold symbolizes the removal of sensory interference, relying solely on rational judgment, the blindfold of procedural justice. The scale and the sword. The scale represents fair weighing, while the sword embodies the authority of sanction. Together, they constitute a complete totem of judicial power. In her daily life, however, she did not wear a blindfold or carry the scale. Instead, a long sword was tucked into her waist, seemingly indicating that she was no weak or powerless goddess. Cronus was surprised by her visit, and after hearing her proposal, he agreed without the slightest hesitation. For something that could push the world toward perfection, as long as Cronus agreed, the world would grant him more recognition, even if he did nothing substantial himself. After nearly 1,000 years of effort, he was just one small step away from that final bit of recognition. He was about to become the true God King, the well-deserved God King who far surpassed the rest of the divine race. Over this millennium, Cronus had been less a heroic God King and more a diligent laborer, spending every day finding ways to perfect the world to gain a bit more recognition from it. Compared to his father, the first-generation god King Uranus, his tenure as God King truly lacked prestige. Many of the third-generation gods even felt that Cronus was less respected than Oceanus, the ocean god. It was simply that Oceanus was too prolific, his offspring alone were almost more numerous than all the other gods in the world combined, except, of course, for the lineages of the mountain gods and the galaxies, who were equally prolific. Having many offspring meant having many people who listened to him, which meant more influence. If the era of patriarchal kingship hadn't passed, Oceanus might have been the well-deserved god king. Under these circumstances, Oceanus's respect for Cronus's god-king was very limited, essentially just lip service. The other Titans were much the same. They ruled as kings in their respective domains and would even directly ignore some of Cronus's commands. Cronus could do nothing about this and could only silently continue his work, but that didn't mean he had no thoughts on the matter. He was just waiting for the day the world fully recognized him, waiting for the day he possessed the Genesis great power of the God King. When that time came, it would naturally be time to settle accounts. And now, that day seemed to be arriving very soon. Cronus had a premonition that once he helped Themis complete the laws, he would receive the full recognition of the chaos world and become the true God King. At this thought, Cronus's gaze turned fervent. He actively provided help to Themis, essentially solving any difficulties she encountered. This gave Themis a favorable impression of him. After some thought, she offered a reminder. Great God King, perhaps you should not be too lenient. The gods cannot be convinced by a monarch without a temper, but temper does not mean tyranny, benevolence remains a virtue. This was a veiled reminder of Cronus's current situation, where his title as God King was becoming one in name only. However, Themis also did not want him to become a tyrant like Uranus, so she added the second part. Cronus smiled and said nonchalantly, "Thank you for the reminder. I will take it to heart." Themis nodded. She put away her codex and prepared to travel across the land to draft the order. Before leaving, she curiously asked about her sister, the current god queen, Rhea, the goddess of time. "How is Her Highness Rhea lately? I haven't seen her for hundreds of years," Themis asked. "She is very well," Cronus said with a smile. "That is good then." Themis finally felt at ease and said, "Then I shall go to establish the laws and order." Cronus nodded and said sincerely, "May justice be with us." After speaking, he personally saw off the goddess who symbolized justice, then returned to the divine mountain and went to Rhea's temple. Rhea looked haggard now, having aged considerably. She appeared to be in poor spirits, no longer the radiant and beautiful young girl she once was. This indicated that her origin had suffered depletion. Seeing Cronus arrive, there was no trace of her former love in Rhea's eyes, only anger mixed with fear. She cautiously protected her bulging belly, her eyes full of vigilance. However, Cronus didn't care. He still approached her warmly and, completely ignoring Rhea's struggles and resistance, forcibly pulled her into his arms to tell her about what had just happened. On one hand, he was thinking about when Themis's laws and order, representing justice, would appear, as this related to when he would be fully recognized by the world. On the other hand, he gently stroked Rhea's bulging belly, as this related to when he could have his extra meal, and acquire yet another new law. Under Cronus's powerful strength, Rhea could not struggle at all. She only felt that this scene was incredibly ironic. Cronus spoke of justice and order, yet what he was doing was the most unjust and order-destroying act of all. How tragic, and how laughable. Themis walked upon the earth, feeling the guidance of the world and the rules of the universe's operation, establishing one law after another, and the code in her hand became increasingly perfected. About 500 years passed before the complete set of worldly laws was finally finished. Ever since she began to legislate, many gods had cast their gazes over, though most were merely curious, wanting to see what this so-called order and fairness was. But after watching for a few years and finding it uninteresting, they withdrew their gazes one after another. It was not until the legislation was completed, the world sensed and changed, and at the same time, Themis's strength rapidly increased, transforming from a weak existence among the Titans to one of the most powerful, that they cast their surprised gazes once again. At the same time, there was another gaze coming from the endless void at the edge of the world. Unlike the other gods, Talon had been watching every move of Themis, from the beginning to the end. Not bad. Feeling the growth of divine power within his body, Talon withdrew his gaze with great satisfaction. Although Themis's legislation was not driven by him, as long as the world progressed and improved, Talon could still share in the benefits, just not as much as if he had driven it himself. But this was understandable. After all, one had participated while the other had not. Distributing rewards according to contribution was very fair. Prometheus, who had been running to him frequently over the past few hundred years, saw that Talon had finally withdrawn his gaze and spoke with a smile. "Respected Lord Talon, for you to pay attention to it for so long, it must be a very significant matter. You should have sensed it too. This is a very good thing." Talon responded with a smile as well. "With laws and fairness, this world can distinguish right from wrong and develop better." Prometheus nodded in agreement. As the god of foresight and a branch of fate, he also hoped that this world would get better and better. This is a matter very much worth celebrating, but now is not the time for celebration, there are other more important things happening. Talon said. "Perhaps very soon, I will welcome an unexpected guest here." Prometheus was a bit puzzled, not knowing who this unexpected guest was, nor knowing what could be more important than the legislation, but seeing that Talon had no intention of explaining, he suppressed the curiosity in his heart. What he did not know was that because Themis's legislation was successful, when many titans, including the god king Cronus, rushed to celebrate, a haggard figure quietly left the sacred mountain. That was none other than Rhea, the god queen who had been trapped on the sacred mountain by Cronus for years. Because she was always being watched by Cronus, she only dared to sneak away while Cronus went to offer congratulations. At this moment, this goddess of time had lost her youth and vitality, and she looked incomparably exhausted. Keeping it from everyone, she quietly came to the palace of Mother Earth, Gaia. Gaia was very surprised by Rhea's arrival, and even more surprised by her current appearance, so she couldn't help but ask, Rhea, my child, why have you become so weak? What has happened? Merciful Mother Earth, Great Mother Earth, I beg you to protect me, I beg you to help me. Rhea said, immediately shedding painful tears and letting out a desperate wail. That cruel god King Cronus, he ate our children. What? Gaia immediately let out a voice filled with fury. Her face was full of disbelief, as if she could not believe what she had heard. Gaia clearly remembered that Cronus had once found her and requested that she withdraw the child in Rhea's womb, but he had been severely scolded by Gaia. Gaia had said at the time that not only would she not withdraw it, she would bless it, so Rhea's child would certainly be born. These words could also be considered a warning, warning Cronus not to think about those absurd things anymore. Some things were destined to be unstoppable, just like the birth of a child, just like the succession of divine power. Now 1,000 years had passed, and Cronus had never come to talk to her about these matters again, and there was no movement on the sacred mountain. Gaia had thought that Cronus had followed her advice and had not gone to make those meaningless attempts. As it turned out, upon discovering that the birth of the child could not be prevented, he had actually chosen to eat the child. What an absurd thing this was, it was simply shocking. So many years have passed, from Hestia, to Demeter, Hera, Hades, and finally Poseidon, he has already eaten 5 of my children. Rhea choked, almost unable to speak. I wanted to stop him, but I couldn't. He is too powerful, I don't even have the ability to struggle. Thinking of those children of hers who had been eaten alive, while she could only watch helplessly without the power to stop it, Rhea was in such pain that she almost fainted. She wept bitterly, and the immense sorrow and sadness almost overwhelmed her. Gaia looked at Rhea, who was tortured beyond recognition before her, and looked at this poor daughter of hers, she felt just as bad. Gaia had once encountered a similar situation, so she empathized, knowing what a desperate and painful thing this was. At the same time, this merciful Mother Earth also felt incomparable anger. She held the authority of fertility, this behavior of Cronus was no less than a provocation, and even more heinous. Cronus has completely forgotten the duties of the god king. He has now become exactly like his cruel father, Uranus. Perhaps we should make that curse come true. What curse? Rhea asked blankly, she still knew nothing. Back then, because of Talon's interruption, except for Cronus who went to ask Talon in person, and Gaia who was informed by Cronus, the other gods did not know the content of the curse, nor did they know that the curse was still continuing. Gaia then told the curse to Rhea, who had been kept in the dark. Rhea suddenly realized and murmured with a choke. No wonder, no wonder. So he is afraid of being overthrown by his own children, which is why he swallows our children again and again. He has changed. He is no longer the brave and fearless Cronus I loved, he has become cowardly and weak, cruel and vicious. As Rhea spoke, she suddenly thought of something, and her expression suddenly became extremely terrified. She pressed her hand against her still flat abdomen and begged for help in a panic. Mother Earth, save me, save this child. Cronus will definitely not let this child go either. Gaia only then noticed that there was a faint aura in Rhea's womb again. Perhaps because it had just begun to conceive, that aura was still very weak, so she had not discovered it at first. This merciful Mother Earth's expression suddenly became very complex. She softened her voice and comforted her softly. Rhea, my daughter, do not be afraid, do not be sad. Rest assured, I will definitely help you. She began to think about what to do. Although they were great primordial gods, Gaia was not good at fighting, and Rhea, as the goddess of time, was the same. Relying on just the two of them, it was completely impossible to fight against Cronus, who had occupied the throne of the god king for 1,000 years and had also been thoroughly recognized by the world. This scene was so familiar that Gaia was even a little dazed. Back then, she had faced a similar predicament, only the one she had to resist at that time was the first generation god king, Uranus. At that time, Uranus was equally powerful, even more invincible than the current Cronus, but Gaia still won because of that one's guidance. Thinking of this, Gaia's expression became even more complex. She looked at Rhea and said with extreme seriousness, "Perhaps, we should go and ask fate. For His Majesty the God King Cronus, eating his own children was a habit that either happened 0 times or countless times. After all, doing so allowed him to both resist the curse and enhance his own strength. In any case, as long as the children were not born, he would have no descendants, and naturally, there would be no possibility of being overthrown by his own children. And those laws that were newly conceived with the birth of the children, once swallowed by him, could also be utilized by him, allowing him to become even more powerful. It was simply killing 2 birds with 1 stone. Therefore, ever since discovering this method, he no longer resisted being intimate with Rhea. Besides, if a new god was born, he would simply eat it on the spot. However, the pain of losing her children one after another nearly caused Rhea to collapse. After learning the content of the curse from Gaia, Rhea finally understood everything. She was completely disappointed in Cronus, feeling that he had become a cruel fellow just like the first god king, Uranus. At the same time, she wanted more and more to protect the life newly conceived in her womb, and under Gaia's guidance, she arrived alone at that endless void. But she felt somewhat apprehensive in her heart. Her impression of Talon remained at the moment when he stepped forward to interrupt Uranus's curse. She felt this ancient deity was too mysterious and dared not try to understand him too much, always feeling that he was extremely dangerous and needed to be treated with caution. When Hestia was born, she had invited Talon purely out of respect and never expected that he would actually attend the banquet. Thinking about it now, perhaps Lord Talon had already realized something at that time, which was why he left the void he had not departed from for hundreds of years to personally visit her and Hestia. It is just a pity that I was too dull at the time and did not discover the anomaly hidden within. Rhea thought to herself, sighed deeply, and looking at the vast void before her, she finally made up her mind and stepped inside. At this very moment, Talon was not in the least surprised by Ray's arrival, for he had been waiting for a long time. Respected God Queen, merciful goddess of time, you do not seem to be doing very well. Talon's tone carried obvious concern, and his expression was as gentle as always. This caused Ray's originally tense mood to slowly relax. She nodded and spoke in a hoarse voice, "Lord Talon, please forgive my presumptuous intrusion, I wish to ask for your help." At this moment, Rhea wore a black veil, her expression solemn and sorrowful, lacking the girlish appearance she had before. "It is my honor to be able to help you." Talon said, "Respected Lady Rhea, how do you wish for me to help you?" "I want to protect this poor child of mine. I do not want the curse of the god of the sky, Uranus, to come to pass, and I want to end this painful life." Rhea said, her emotions becoming somewhat agitated. She looked at Talon with eyes full of hope, as if she had grasped the last straw. "Lord Talon, you must have a way, don't you?" Talon sighed softly, his gaze towards Rhea filled with a bit more pity. "Lady Rhea, I feel very sad about what you have suffered. But please rest assured, fate will steer everything back on track. Do not be sad, what is lost will always return, and those who have parted will be reunited." "You mean?" Ray's eyes gradually brightened, "I can still see those poor children of mine again." Talon did not answer this question but merely revealed a comforting smile. He looked at Ray's lower abdomen, which she was unconsciously protecting even at this moment, and said softly, "Because of your mercy and kindness, you will save this child, and he will become the hope for everything." Upon hearing this, Ray's tightly furrowed brows finally smoothed out, her joy overflowing, and she asked somewhat eagerly, "Lord Talon, what should I do? How can I protect this child? The merciful Mother Earth, who holds the divine authority over childbirth, will help you. Even the God King, under the influence of Mother Earth, cannot distinguish exactly what a newly born life is. You can completely use this method to deceive the God King. So do not worry, you will protect this child. The God King's focus will not be on you now, so all you need to do now is wait patiently." These words were vague, and Rhea was very confused. "Wait. What do I need to wait for? The time is not yet ripe." Talon smiled and said softly, "You must wait for the day when everything is ready. As for when that day will arrive, someone will tell you. At that time, if you are still worried, you can come and ask me again, and I will give you a definitive answer. Everything that is happening now is bound to happen, you only need to follow your heart. Oh, kind goddess of time, when you decide to resist tyranny and injustice, fate will be on your side." Ray's eyes reddened slightly. The man's gentle words completely calmed her heart, which had been in a constant state of panic, as if she had suddenly seen the dawn in an environment filled with fog and unknown direction. Rhea was finally no longer hesitant or uneasy. She nodded vigorously and expressed her sincere gratitude to Talon earnestly. Talon watched her with consistent gentleness. Despite his face being so young, he gave the impression of a kind elder, although in terms of age, he could indeed be considered an elder. After sending Rhea off, Talon did not fall into a deep sleep as he had in the past but continued to wait patiently. In the time he had foreseen, he waited for his guest, a strange deity he had never seen before. From his appearance, the visitor looked somewhat aged, with gray hair, many wrinkles on his face, and dark eyes that were somewhat cloudy. Through the hints of fate, Talon knew the visitor's identity, the primordial sea god, Pontus. This was the child Gaia had conceived alone after giving birth to the first god king, Uranus. He was Uranus's younger brother and also the uncle of the 12 Titans. When the 12 Titans were opposing Uranus, faced with Uranus's plea for help, Pontus chose to ignore it, which led to Uranus losing his last chance and being completely finished. This was undoubtedly a very ancient god, but he was usually too low-key and had almost never left the outer sea, to the extent that many people did not know his appearance. Especially after the influence of the ocean god, Oceanus, became stronger and stronger, fewer and fewer people would mention this primordial sea god. Pontus actually did not dislike this kind of life. He had never liked fighting for power, nor did he think there was anything wrong with his juniors taking his sea-related divine authority. He was quite happy to be relaxed and carefree. In order to express his closeness, he had even previously married his eldest daughter to Oceanus, which was enough to show the peaceful mindset of this primordial sea god. But while he did not think it was bad for Oceanus to be too strong, someone else could not tolerate it. That person was none other than the current His Majesty the God King, Cronus, who had already gained the complete recognition of the world. Possessing power, he began preparing to settle scores, and the first one he wanted to settle scores with was the most glorious and infinite ocean god, Oceanus, of the past millennium. Cronus was not truly a good-tempered deity. All his tolerance for the disregard his Titans brothers had shown toward his authority as the God King over the past millennium was simply because his strength was not yet sufficient. He had been biding his time, keeping all the disrespectful treatment he had endured over this millennium in his heart, waiting for this very moment when he would be thoroughly recognized by the world and fully obtain the great power of the God King. Now, he had finally waited for it, and the first person he had to deal with was Oceanus. Over the past millennium, some gods had even said that the God King's commands were not as effective as the ocean god's words. Although this was just a joke, it was a fact that Cronus's divine decrees could not leave the sacred mountain, while Oceanus could command 100 responses with a single call. In fact, at the very beginning, if it hadn't been for Oceanus sustaining a serious injury while neutralizing the masculine power on Uranus's remains, temporarily losing his combat ability, it was uncertain who would have become the God King. The fact that the position of God King felt like it had been picked up by chance was always a thorn in Cronus's side, and he was filled with wariness toward this powerful brother of his. He had tolerated him before because he was not strong enough, but once he gained the power, he could no longer tolerate him. Therefore, after obtaining the complete power of the God King, the first thing Cronus did was to seek out the primordial sea god Pontus, demanding that Pontus deal with Oceanus and seize the sea-related divine authority. This was the most effective way to weaken Oceanus, since everyone belonged to the water-type sea gods. If one side became stronger, the other would be weakened. If Pontus were a very ambitious sea god, he would certainly agree readily, and then, with Cronus's secret assistance, directly vie for authority and power with Oceanus. But the problem was that he was not. From beginning to end, Pontus had always been a very low-key deity who did not like to fight for power or profit. That was why he had been able to survive under the cruel tyranny of the first-generation God King, Uranus, until now. It was because his personality posed no threat to Uranus, allowing Uranus to barely tolerate this brother. In order to live in harmony with Oceanus, he had even married off his eldest daughter. Yet now, Cronus was demanding he seize power, and doing so by directly threatening him with the great power of the God King, not allowing him to refuse. Pontus had no choice but to seek help from Mother Earth Gaia, but Gaia had not participated in the struggle for divine authority for over a millennium and had no good ideas regarding this. Thus, this Mother Earth gave her usual old advice: when in doubt, go ask Talon, and let fate provide you with guidance. And so, Pontus came. Because it involved himself, Talon had long since known the cause and effect of this through the perception of fate. Regarding this, he only wanted to say that Gaia was recommending him equally to everyone. It was clear she trusted him very much. It was also because he knew all of this that he had just told Rhea that Cronus's focus would not be on her, allowing her to boldly and confidently deceive the God King. After all, having finally obtained power, Cronus now only wanted to quickly consolidate authority and take charge. As for that curse, he would only think that he had found the best way to solve it and would not pay it much more attention. This was precisely Ray's best opportunity, and as for whether she could seize it, Talon believed in the power a desperate mother could erupt with. Respected Lord Talon, I request the guidance of fate. Pontus spoke with a face full of sorrow, his eyes filled with helplessness. I ask that you tell me what I should do to resolve the crisis before me. Talon looked at the honest man before him who had been forced into the conflict, thought for a moment, and said, perhaps, this is not a bad thing. Upon hearing this, Pontus immediately revealed a look of confusion and asked sincerely, please enlighten me. Talon smiled and patiently explained, you are merely acting under the pressure of the God King's authority, not initiating the conflict yourself. In this situation, there is much room for maneuver. You cannot refuse the request of His Majesty the God King, Cronus, so follow his orders. It is not as terrifying as you imagine, nor will it bring about a horrific war, provided that you let Oceanus know this was not your intention. A thoughtful expression immediately appeared on Pontus's face. Seeing that he still seemed hesitant, Talon thoughtfully added, Oceanus will know the truth, he is not a foolish god. Of course, you must pay attention to the method, the appearance is more important than the substance. I believe you will handle the nuances of this well. This was hinting that Pontus should not cause too much destruction, he should mainly focus on making it look like a show to deal with Cronus. This was indeed what the low-key loving Pontus was best at. He had survived under Uranus's brutal rule by relying on this very skill. After hearing this, the tense expression on Pontus's face finally relaxed a little. He nodded and exclaimed, Lord Talon, you truly are a great existence. Your guidance has helped me escape my confusion and clarified what I should do. Talon always wore a smile that made people feel at ease, and he patiently answered more of Pontus's detailed questions. And just as they were talking, the Temple of Fate, which also belonged to the edge of the world, welcomed a guest as well. Great God King, what brings you to us? The three fates, moving through the temple, spoke simultaneously, their voices ethereal like wind chimes. Cronus looked at the three goddesses before him, a polite and courteous smile appearing on his face. Great goddesses of fate, please forgive me for never visiting in the past millennium, there were simply too many trivial matters. You are too kind, His Majesty the God King. The eldest sister, Clotho, spoke, her expression somewhat confused. So, is there something you wish to ask about? No, beautiful goddesses, I just wish to atone for my past rudeness. Cronus said, his smile growing increasingly sincere, as if he were truly ashamed for not having visited over the past millennium and had come specifically to apologize. He did not know that there was a connection between the three fates and Talon, because this matter was simply too secret. Apart from Uranus, who was in a deep slumber, only Gaia and Nyx knew. However, these two primordial goddesses had never publicized it, so in the eyes of the 12 Titans, the three fates, who were born on the same day as them, were conceived solely by Nyx. These three goddesses were also mysterious enough that few people knew the location of their sacred mountain, and Cronus only came to know of it after he became the God King completely and obtained control over the entire world. However, even if he had known about it earlier, he would not have dared to visit, because the matter he wanted to discuss had to be kept hidden deep in his heart until he possessed the complete great power of the God King. And at this moment, the idea that had sprouted the moment he ascended to the position of God King could finally be implemented. He looked at the three goddesses before him, who were filled with confusion, and said with a smile, to show my apologies, I am willing to help you obtain the complete divine authority of fate. I believe this is also what the goddesses are looking forward to, right? Gods cannot be killed, but gods can be weakened. Just as both belong to the oceanic pantheon, as ocean god Oceanus grows stronger, primordial sea god Pontus grows weaker, the two can contend for authority. Therefore, Cronus went to find Pontus to suppress Oceanus. Based on this same principle, Cronus came to the Temple of Fate and found the three fates. The one he sought to suppress was none other than God of Fate Talon. Cronus was cautious by nature, so cautious that he bordered on paranoid. He could not tolerate any existence that threatened him. Thus, from the moment he ascended to the throne, Talon, who could even influence the fate of the God King, was deeply feared by him. Moreover, he feared Talon far more than he feared Oceanus. After all, Oceanus was merely powerful, whereas what made Talon most terrifying was the unknown. He was too mysterious, so mysterious that no one knew exactly how powerful he was, nor did anyone know exactly how much he knew. The only thing the gods knew was that for Talon, divine power levels could not measure him, his superficial weakness represented nothing. After all, when he was still at a weak divine power level, he had predicted the end of the first generation God King, Uranus. When he was still at a medium divine power level, a single sentence had stopped Uranus's desperate curse. With a guy like that, who would dare believe he only possessed that little bit of weak power on the surface? At the very least, Cronus did not believe it, nor dared he believe it. With such a fellow in existence, his tenure as God King felt like having a fishbone stuck in his throat. Before, when he lacked the power, he could just endure it, but now that he was recognized by the world and possessed the complete might of the God King, if he did not find a way to resolve it, would his God King might not be in vain. However, due to his cautious nature, he would not engage in direct confrontation. Whether it was Talon, Oceanus, or other existences he feared, he would not suppress them openly. What he was best at was driving tigers to swallow wolves, inciting disputes, and plotting behind the scenes where no one could see. This was also the biggest difference between him and Uranus, the first-generation God King, who loved to handle things personally. However, when facing the equally mysterious the three fates, whose bottom line he did not know, Cronus was still very polite. At the very least, he did not use direct threats and inducements as he had with primordial sea god Pontus. After the three fates were first puzzled and then flatly refused, Cronus did not show any dissatisfaction, but instead asked earnestly, "Beautiful goddesses, why do you refuse me? Do you feel my offering is not sincere enough?" He deliberately put on a troubled look and said somewhat helplessly, "But your divine authority is so mysterious, the only gift I can think of that is worthy of you is more authority over fate. This would make you incomparably powerful and able to glimpse more of the trajectory of fate. Isn't this what you desire?" His attitude was so sincere that one could hardly find any fault with it. The three fates looked at each other, their expressions somewhat peculiar. The eldest sister, Clotho, spoke after some thought, her gaze toward Cronus very complex. "Great His Majesty the God King, we do not wish to possess more authority, because everything is fated, and as servants of fate, we need to respect fate. We do not wish to participate in the struggles between divine authorities, this also does not align with our desires. We ask for His Majesty's understanding," the second sister, Lachesis, added. "But we still thank His Majesty for your good intentions. We will remember His Majesty's concern," concluded the youngest goddess, Atropos. Rejected again, Cronus still did not appear to have any dissatisfaction. He nodded thoughtfully and smiled. "I see. It was my presumption. Then may I inquire about a prophecy regarding fate?" Cronus thought for a moment and said, "Of course, His Majesty the God King." The three goddesses spoke in unison. "It is our honor to ease your worries. I would like to know if primordial sea god Pontus will take action against ocean god Oceanus. After all, they seem to have held a grudge for a long time." Cronus said, his face showing a worried expression, as if he were truly a good god king concerned about conflict. "He will. Primordial sea god Pontus will take action against ocean god Oceanus in the near future." The goddesses gave a definitive answer. They cast a meaningful look at Cronus but said nothing more. "That is truly terrible." Cronus sighed and asked again, "If I have questions in the future, may I come to visit again?" "Of course, Your Majesty." Having obtained the answer he wanted, Cronus then took his leave with satisfaction. Although the three fates had refused him and were unwilling to contend for authority, this did not exceed his expectations. Because these gods involved in fate, perhaps because they saw more things, always had their own ideas and were very difficult to persuade. Therefore, the main purpose of his visit this time was actually to test the attitude of these three goddesses and see if they could be of use to him. Facing the mysterious Talon, Cronus was always worried. He needed gods who were also involved in the domain of fate to stand on his side and provide hints when necessary. Next, it would depend on whether Pontus would take action soon. If he did, it would mean that these three goddesses also possessed the ability to foresee the future. Then he would choose these three goddesses to devise strategies for him in the future, thereby getting rid of and replacing Talon. But getting rid of and replacing him was only the first step. His true purpose was, after having no further use for Talon, to find a way to seal him completely and imprison him in the abyss, Tartarus. Only then could he be at ease. With his thoughts becoming increasingly clear, Cronus returned to the divine mountain and arrived at Rhea's temple. With the help of Mother Earth Gaia, Cronus did not discover that Rhea had ever left. Everything was no different from usual. But as he approached, he quickly discovered Rhea's abnormality. "You are pregnant with our child again?" he asked with some surprise, but he was no longer as panicked as he had been when he first discovered this matter. Anyway, once born, he would just devour it, and it would be as if it had never been born. Cronus felt that he had already broken the curse, so naturally, he was no longer worried. Rhea gave him a cold look, saying nothing. Cronus had long been accustomed to Ray's attitude. Instead, he began to guess the child's divine office with some anticipation, because as long as he devoured the child, he could obtain the corresponding laws. For him, this was equivalent to possessing a new ability, which would make him stronger. Thinking this, he even began to feel some delight. Rhea looked at Cronus before her and felt only that he was incomparably strange. The greedy gaze he cast upon her lower abdomen made her almost want to vomit. I must end all of this, she said in her heart, the hidden look in her eyes becoming increasingly firm. Above the endless great ocean, Pontus took a deep breath, trying to dispel the hesitation in his heart before acting, but he still subconsciously looked at the distant sky. In his mind, he couldn't help but recall his conversation with Talon from not long ago. Today was the day they had agreed to take action. Because Pontus was truly worried about causing bad consequences, he had asked Talon to testify for him. Pontus could see that Oceanus gave Talon a lot of face. If Talon was willing to act as the mediator to reconcile the conflict and prove that he had no desire for struggle and was entirely coerced by the God King, Oceanus would likely believe him. Talon had agreed. Only then did Pontus have the confidence to act. Taking another deep breath, Pontus raised his hands, his aged face turning solemn. Following his movements, the entire sea surface began to boil, as if something was collapsing at the bottom of the ocean. As the primordial sea god birthed by Gaia alone, symbolizing the barren saltwater realm of the bottom of the ocean, Pontus's authority leaned more toward the geological aspect of the ocean itself. He could easily detonate the bottom of the ocean, causing a massive loss of seawater, and that was exactly what he was doing now. He caused a massive rift to open in the seabed at the edge of the great ocean. In an instant, countless volumes of seawater poured in, and a terrifying sound echoed throughout the entire great ocean. This seawater poured through the rift into the eternal abyss, Tartarus, vanishing without a trace in an instant. The most direct damage this caused was that the divine power of Oceanus, who symbolized the great ocean, would decrease accordingly. The ocean god Oceanus realized the problem almost immediately. Without the slightest hesitation, he rushed out of his temple and headed straight for the site of the anomaly. Under such a terrifying commotion, the other ocean deities all trembled, hiding fearfully under the protection of Tethys. For a moment, the commotion in the great ocean was so great that it even attracted the curious gazes of many gods. However, they did not act rashly and were still watching from afar. Following the sound, Oceanus soon saw Pontus taking action, and for a moment, he was filled with shock and fury. Many thoughts flashed through his mind in an instant. His first reaction was that he had been deceived, that Pontus's years of being aloof from worldly affairs were all an act. The goal was merely to lull him into a false sense of security. But he soon noticed something was wrong. If Pontus had long desired to seize power, why wait until now to act? 1,000 years ago, when they had just defeated Uranus, would have been the best opportunity. At that time, he had lost his combat capability for a long period due to heavy injuries from dismantling the remains. If Pontus had acted then, he would have certainly suffered a severe blow to his vitality. But Pontus hadn't. He had even married his eldest daughter to a titan to show goodwill. It was also this behavior that made Oceanus lower his guard against this primordial sea god, believing that he truly disliked conflict. For all these years, both sides had minded their own business. So why on earth was Pontus picking a fight now? At this moment, the doubt in Oceanus's heart even surpassed his anger. Seeing Oceanus arrive, Pontus was also apprehensive. He didn't know how to explain. Speaking directly might draw the God King's dissatisfaction, while staying silent might lead Oceanus to attack immediately. He could only look toward the distant void again, hoping for Talon's arrival. What he didn't know was that at this very moment, a figure abruptly appeared before Talon, blocking his path to the great ocean. Prince Talon, it has been many days since we last met. Are you well? Looking at the familiar white-robed figure before him, the god King Cronus spoke with a smile. He was still very polite, but the fear he once felt toward Talon was long gone. This was the confidence brought to him by the great power of the god King. This unparalleled power made him feel that no god in this world could be his enemy. What he represented was the will of the world. However, his personality dictated that even with great power, he would still be wary where he should be, and would find ways to suppress others, rather than being blindly arrogant like the first god King Uranus, who looked down on everyone. From this perspective, the second god King Cronus had learned quite a few lessons from the first god King Uranus. Your Majesty the God King, I trust you have been well. Talon showed a timely hint of surprise at Cronus's appearance, which made the smile on Cronus's face even more pronounced. Where are you heading in such a hurry, Prince Talon? Cronus asked as if casually, appearing as though he had just happened to run into Talon and was making small talk. There seems to be some disturbance in the great ocean. I was planning to go take a look, Talon answered truthfully. I have also heard a little about this matter. However, I believe it would be better to let them resolve it themselves. Prince Talon, don't you agree with what I'm saying? Talon did not answer immediately. He frowned slightly, seeming to hesitate. This expression of his pleased Cronus even more, and his opinion of the three fates rose accordingly. That the primordial sea god Pontus would take action today and that Talon would head to the great ocean to mediate, all of this had been told to him by the three fates. Thus, he had arrived here early specifically to intercept Talon. He certainly couldn't let Talon ruin his plan, so he would stay here and keep an eye on Talon until the outcome in the great ocean was decided. When everything happened exactly as those three goddesses had said, Cronus felt immensely reassured. It turned out that this mysterious Talon could also be prophesied. He wasn't that impressive after all. Cronus was happy that he had finally found a way to counter Talon, and his mood became quite cheerful. Seeing that Talon seemed to have no way to deal with him, with a look of helplessness on his face, the feeling of being in control of everything and playing others in the palm of his hand gave Cronus immense satisfaction. Especially since the other party was the god of fate, whom he had once feared so much. Precisely because he was so immersed in this feeling of revenge being served, he did not notice the slight curl at the corner of Talon's mouth behind that troubled expression. Ignoring the triumphant His Majesty the God King, Talon silently counted down the time in his heart. At the moment the count reached 0, in a cave on Mount Dicta on the far-off island of Crete. Amidst Ray's painful groans, the loud cry of a baby suddenly rang out. The cry was loud enough to echo through the region. Almost at the same moment the baby was born, a thick bolt of lightning streaked across the sky of this world, followed by a massive peal of thunder. Under the cover of the lightning and thunder, the baby's cries became inconspicuous. Except for a few people, no one knew of his birth. At this very moment, the god King Cronus was still confronting Talon in the distant sky, immersed in the pride of having power in his hands, completely unaware of all this. The exhausted Rhea looked at the baby in her arms and couldn't help but shed tears of joy. She gave the baby a name, calling him Zeus. Oceanus, the ocean god, and Pontus, the primordial sea god, did not end up fighting after all. Just as Talon had said, Oceanus was never a foolish god, and furthermore, this trap could hardly be considered very sophisticated. With just a moment's thought, Oceanus keenly sensed that something was wrong. Although he did not know why Pontus would do this for no reason, he restrained himself and did not immediately lash out. However, deep down, he had become wary of Pontus. To prevent Pontus from acting again, Oceanus placed a barrier directly between the ocean and the outer seas, which seemed to signify the rift between the two sea gods. Pontus could only respond with a bitter smile, unable to do anything about it. Seeing this, Cronus, far away in the heavens, nodded in satisfaction, the smile in his eyes becoming even more pronounced. Although it was a pity that the two sea gods did not fight directly, this was something he had anticipated, so it was not a surprise. His true purpose was to sow discord between these two sea gods, to prevent the oceanic water divine power from becoming too dominant. Weakening Oceanus was just a side benefit. Ever since Pontus married his daughter to a titan 1,000 years ago, which was, in reality, a political alliance, Cronus had been worried about collusion between them. Now, that possibility had finally been completely severed. Cronus had always wanted to see the various deities keep each other in check. If they were all harmonious and united, he, as the God King, would likely be unable to sleep at night. His Majesty the God King, your goal has been achieved, but from now on, the ocean may never be peaceful again. The children of Lord Pontus and the children of Lord Oceanus may even become hostile toward each other and fight. Is this what you wanted to see? Talon spoke softly. There was no accusation in his voice, it was purely a matter-of-fact tone. Upon hearing this, Cronus merely smiled and said nonchalantly, this world has been peaceful for 1,000 years, a few occasional frictions are nothing. Talon nodded and said no more, only asking, then may I leave now? Of course, Lord Talon, that is your freedom, Cronus said with a smile, as if he had never obstructed Talon, and the two had merely happened to meet and exchange a few words. Talon turned to leave, but just at that moment, Cronus suddenly spoke up. He said, appearing nonchalant, Lord Talon, perhaps this world would progress more rapidly if there were more conflict. Perhaps we should not interfere too much, and letting things take their natural course is best. What do you think? This was a warning, admonishing Talon not to meddle in such affairs in the future. You are right, Talon replied with a smile, as if he did not understand the implication in Cronus's words. His Majesty the God King, everything will be as you wish. Meanwhile, on Crete, inside a hidden cave. Rhea looked at the infant before her. Tears kept sliding down her haggard yet still beautiful face. These were tears of joy, as well as tears of reluctance and sorrow. These crystalline tears fell onto the earth and transformed into massive human forms. These beings, holding weapons or shields, were none other than the Korets. These creatures born of tears were powerful demigods from birth. Their only purpose was to protect the young Zeus. Whenever Zeus cried, they would brandish their shields and sing loudly, masking the cries that would otherwise echo through the space. Rhea beckoned, and a golden female goat slowly walked in from outside the cave, meekly and quietly crouching down beside the infant, gently covering the child with its soft fur. This goat would provide sacred milk for the young child, which was the primary source of nutrition needed for his growth. Taking one last reluctant look at the child, Rhea knew she had to leave, otherwise, the god king might notice something amiss. Before leaving, she went to find 3 nymphs of Crete and entrusted them with caring for the young Zeus. These nymphs were the ash nymphs born from the blood that dripped when the remains of the first god king, Uranus, slashed across the sky, nurtured by Gaia. They were true deities. Only such deities could properly care for the newborn Zeus and withstand the divine power he radiated unconsciously. Zeus was immensely powerful from birth. When 2 deities conceive a new offspring, representing new laws, it is mostly an extension of their own laws. Whether the new deity is powerful depends, more often than not, on whether their own laws are powerful. Of course, this is not absolute, but it is the case most of the time. And when Cronus and Rhea conceived Zeus, not to mention the laws he already mastered, he had also gained more laws by devouring his first 5 children. It was the time when he was at his most powerful. Therefore, the moment Zeus was born, he possessed a boundless power that other deities could hardly imagine. Because this also gathered the power of his first 5 older siblings. If Cronus had not devoured those 5 children and gained the corresponding laws, the newly conceived Zeus would not have been able to be this powerful. However, Cronus was completely unaware of all this. After arranging everything properly, Rhea finally left and quietly returned to the sacred mountain. With the help of Gaia, Mother Earth, she transformed a stone shaped like a human into the likeness of Zeus, then carefully wrapped it in cloth and placed it on the bed. As the goddess of childbirth, Gaia, Mother Earth, could imbue this stone with any aura, and only her ability could deceive the god king, Cronus. After everything was set up, Rhea waited nervously in the temple for Cronus's return. She did not wait long. Cronus had been the god king for so many years, yet never had he been as happy as he was today. Not only had he resolved his major threat, Oceanus, but he had also successfully suppressed that mysterious god of fate, Talon. This gave him a sense of relief, as if 1,000 years of repressed endurance had been vindicated with a great revenge achieved in one stroke. This joy almost clouded his mind, and he could not wait to share it with Rhea. Upon returning to the temple and finding that Rhea had given birth to another child, he grabbed it and swallowed it without a second thought. But soon, he discovered with confusion that his divine power had not increased as before, nor had he gained any new laws. However, he did not think much of it. Not all deities possessed laws. Oceanus had long since proven this, as among his 3,000 oceanids, many were merely sea nymphs who possessed no laws themselves. In any case, he had already resolved his major threat, so whether he had new power or laws was not that important. Cronus quickly cast this matter to the back of his mind and began to share his joy with Rhea. Rhea remained as indifferent to him as ever, but Cronus did not care in the least. Because he was the noble god king, he controlled everything. Even if Rhea did not like him, or even resented him, she could only sit there quietly and listen to him. This sense of control, of mastering everything, also made him feel delighted. Following the conflicts between the ocean and the far seas, friction soon arose among other gods as well. The chaos world, which had originally existed in harmony and developed together, began to descend into chaos due to these shifts. As for why this scene unfolded, the gods might have been confused at first, but later, almost everyone knew the truth. Cronus did not even bother to hide his actions. He would threaten and lure gods with similar divine domains to compete for power, while simultaneously fanning the flames in secret, causing the conflicts between the gods to become increasingly irreconcilable. The more chaotic the world became, the fewer people there were who could oppose him. Furthermore, since he already possessed the immense power of the King of Gods, even if the gods were dissatisfied, they had no choice but to swallow their grievances. Cronus had finally become the great king of gods he had imagined, possessing absolute, unquestionable control over the entire world. His 1,000 years of forbearance had finally paid off in a single stroke of triumph. He was even impatient to let everyone witness the majesty of his king of gods. At the same time, he maintained close contact with the three fates, using these beautiful goddesses to predict what would happen next and whether his schemes would succeed. Every single time, the three fates gave correct answers, and everything they said came to pass, which made Cronus trust their abilities all the more. He would even use these goddesses to monitor Talon's every move. Talon was an existence he was always wary of, and only by knowing that he remained quietly in the void could Cronus feel at ease. At the same time, he was also racking his brain, thinking of ways to frame Talon for a crime so that he could be permanently imprisoned in the abyss of Tartarus. If Talon were just an ordinary, unknown god, he, as the king of gods, could naturally deal with him however he pleased. But Talon was well known among the 12 titans, and he also seemed to have a good relationship with Mother Earth, Gaia. In such a situation, one had to be cautious when dealing with Talon, for fear of causing negative repercussions. Of course, this also had to do with Cronus's cautious nature. If it were the first-generation king of gods, Uranus, he wouldn't care about such trifles. Displeasing him was the greatest crime, and he would have dealt with it on the spot. But Cronus did not think there was anything wrong with being cautious. One had to know that Uranus had failed because of his arrogance, and Cronus did not want to follow in his footsteps. It is better to plan slowly. Anyway, I have plenty of time. I hope he knows what is good for him. Cronus thought to himself, and for now, he decided to leave Talon alone. Of course, this was on the condition that he stayed honestly in the void. What Cronus did not know was that in the prophecy of the three fates, Talon, who had supposedly been staying in the void for decades without leaving, was currently standing outside of Crete. Beside him stood Nyx, wrapped in a dark night dotted with stars. Is this the child who needs me to use the land of eternal night to cover him? Nyx's face remained hidden in the black veil formed by the endless dark night, making it impossible to see her true appearance, and her voice, as always, lacked any emotional fluctuation. Yes. Talon nodded and said, only you can succeed in completely hiding his tracks. Very well, Nyx said indifferently, but why should I help you? It is not helping me, it is helping Gaia. Talon smiled and said casually, if you want a reward, you should ask her instead. This was the truth. Gaia could only protect Rhea so that she could secretly give birth to Zeus without being discovered by Cronus, and use a stone transformed into Zeus's appearance to deceive Cronus. However, as this child continued to grow, with his powerful and majestic divine power, Cronus would eventually discover him one day. Only Nyx, who controlled the power of the land of eternal night, could conceal the child's traces. However, Gaia did not have a close relationship with this primordial god who was born at the same time as her, and they hadn't seen each other for 1,000 years. Thus, she begged Talon for help. In Gaia's view, Talon was the god of fate and would surely know that this curse would be fulfilled, perhaps even helping to push it forward. Moreover, after their previous interactions and cooperation, their relationship was considered decent. Added to the fact that he and Nyx had jointly brought forth the three fates, she felt that he and Nyx should be quite close, so she begged Talon to help ask Nyx. Talon could indeed find Nyx in the land of eternal night through the connection between the three fates and their parents, but the relationship between him and Nyx had not reached the point where he could ask for favors. So, he decisively shifted the burden back to Gaia. Nyx gave him a deep look but said nothing. However, she still raised her hand, and endless pitch-black darkness enveloped the edge of Crete, concealing everything there. After finishing this, Nyx took another look at the innocent-looking Talon and said calmly, let this be the only time. After saying this, she turned and left, quickly disappearing into the darkness at the end of the world. Talon did not know what that deep look and that phrase, let this be the only time, meant, but as long as she didn't ask him for a reward, it was fine. Just as he thought, even if Nyx provided help for Gaia's sake, he only needed to bring the person here. And now, he was prepared to find Mother Earth for his reward, 2 portions of it, in fact. Gaia was very surprised by Talon's visit and immediately asked with concern, has some accident happened to that child, Zeus? No, nothing of the sort. Talon shook his head and said with a smile, I have already asked Lady Nyx to conceal his tracks. No one will discover his whereabouts, not even the king of gods. Hearing this, Gaia finally breathed a sigh of relief. She was already certain that Zeus was the child in the prophecy, not only because he was born powerful, but also because of Talon's unusually focused attention on him. But before she could completely set her mind at ease, she heard Talon change the subject and suddenly sigh. It is just that, in order to ask Lady Nyx to take action, I had to expend quite a bit of effort. This shouldn't be brought up, but Lady Nyx seems. He paused deliberately, leaving his words hanging. Gaia understood immediately, and a smile appeared on her face. Does Lady Nyx need something? Come to think of it, this is our own affair. It is troublesome for you and Lady Nyx to help. I do not know how to thank you both. It is nothing much. Talon also smiled, his smile sincere. I only hope that in the future, if I ever need help with something, I ask that the respected Mother Earth will also extend a helping hand. That is only natural. Gaia said seriously, but this cannot count as thanks. How about this? When that child grows up, I will tell him everything truthfully and have him grant you two requests. That will count as thanks for the help from you and Lady Nyx. Talon revealed an expression of surprise. That wouldn't be appropriate. It is what the child ought to do. Gaia said, I will make this decision for him. Talon sighed as if somewhat helpless, stopped declining, and said with a smile, then I thank you for your generosity. Hundreds more years passed, and the power of Cronus grew increasingly vast. Correspondingly, conflicts among the gods became increasingly intense. Everyone knew that His Majesty the God King was pushing things from the shadows, but he gauged the scale so perfectly that he never forced the gods into a dead end. Consequently, no god dared to rebel against this supreme and magnificent God King. Cronus even used his own methods to erode the core authority of the earth and the oceans. In this trinity world of sky, ocean, and earth, he finally became the absolute ruler, a ruler whom no one could oppose. The only thing that left him dissatisfied was perhaps that he had never found any faults in Talon, leaving him unable to permanently imprison this god of fate, whom he feared, into Tartarus. For these hundreds of years, Talon had remained in his void space, even refusing visits from other gods, as if he no longer concerned himself with worldly affairs. Cronus asked the three fates many times, and the answer he received was always that Talon was truly indifferent to worldly affairs. But this did not put Cronus at ease. He was so cautious and suspicious that as long as Talon was not completely imprisoned, he could not rest easy for a single day. He placed his hopes on the god of foresight, Prometheus. Prometheus's father, the Titan Iapetus, was a Titan who firmly supported Cronus and was also an important member of Cronus's faction. If there were any few people whom the suspicious Cronus could still barely trust, Iapetus was certainly among them. And as it happened, Iapetus's child, Prometheus, had previously had good conversations with Talon, and Talon did not resist meeting with this god of foresight. Thus, over these hundreds of years, Prometheus became the only god Talon was still willing to see. Cronus would have Prometheus visit Talon frequently, effectively monitoring Talon's every move and trying to find faults. However, it was a pity that after so many years, Prometheus had not found any faults, though he had done a good job of monitoring. Cronus did not truly trust Prometheus completely, but he would show a bit more tolerance, for the sake of his father, the Titan Iapetus. Moreover, every time Prometheus brought back news, Cronus would ask the three fates about its veracity, and only after receiving an affirmative answer would he believe it. In Cronus's view, Iapetus was a Titan who firmly defended and supported him. Naturally, his child would not defy his father for the sake of an outsider, so he could barely be considered part of his own faction. As for the three fates and Talon, their divine duties conflicted, they existed in a relationship where the stronger one was, the weaker the other became, and vice versa. On this basis, Cronus felt it was impossible for them to be on good terms with Talon. Therefore, if the accounts of Prometheus and the three fates were the same, Cronus had no reason not to believe them. It was less that he believed Prometheus and the three fates, and more that he believed in his own judgment. Therefore, regarding the fact that Prometheus never found any faults, although he was dissatisfied, he could only blame Talon for being too careful, and then instruct Prometheus to visit more diligently. On this day, urged by His Majesty the God King Cronus, Prometheus came to the void once again and saw that familiar white figure. Lord Talon. Prometheus's deep eyes lit up instantly, and his face revealed a sincere smile that had never appeared in front of the God King. Talon smiled back at him. Thanks to Cronus, the two were now quite familiar with each other. The ocean god Oceanus asked me to convey his greetings to you. He wants to tell you that from the foam you blessed back then, a stunningly beautiful goddess was born not long ago. Her name is Aphrodite, the goddess of love and beauty. Her appearance is unparalleled and leaves a deep impression. She is very grateful for your blessing and wanted to come to pay her respects, but I refused. Talon nodded, but was not particularly surprised. He just continued to look at Prometheus with a smile, as if he had anticipated all of this long ago, even though he had never left this void for hundreds of years, yet he still knew everything about the world. This seemingly omniscient ability made the admiration in Prometheus's eyes increasingly obvious. He cleared his throat and continued, the ocean god Oceanus also asked me to inquire about how much longer the future you spoke of will take. As the Titan most severely targeted by His Majesty the God King Cronus, Oceanus had not had an easy time these past few centuries. He was forced to constantly fight against the primordial sea god Pontus, and even his divine authority over the ocean had been eroded significantly, and his divine power had also declined. He was also the god who most hoped to receive guidance from Talon, but unfortunately, Talon would not see anyone except Prometheus, so he could only ask Prometheus to inquire on his behalf. It was not just Oceanus, some other titans who did not want to fight, and even the god Queen Rhea and Mother Earth Gaia, would use Prometheus to ask for the prophecies and opinions of Talon, the god of fate. Of course, all of this was kept from His Majesty the god King Cronus. Otherwise, if Cronus knew that Talon was still communicating with these gods, he would likely be unable to sleep at night again. And what Cronus would never have imagined was that the ones he trusted most, and who he hoped would deal with Talon, Prometheus and the three fates, were actually all on Talon's side. Needless to say, the three fates had a deep connection with Talon. Their ability to peer into fate all came from Talon's gift. As for Prometheus, because of his foresight, he clearly knew what was the right thing to do and what was wrong, so he chose Talon instead of the god king. Relying on them to find Talon's faults, Cronus was destined to be disappointed. That day will not be far off, Talon said with a smile. Tell Lord Oceanus to wait patiently, perhaps it will be tomorrow, perhaps the day after. Upon hearing this, Prometheus's eyes brightened even more. As the messenger, he vaguely knew what, that day, Talon was referring to. It was a new era, a brand new future, the beginning that could end all the chaos before them. Prometheus was incredibly expectant of this. His foresight told him that this was the era where he could fully display his talents, the era where his ideals could be realized. How could he not be expectant? Talon glanced at the excited Prometheus, thought for a moment, and still advised, sometimes doing the right thing does not mean it will have a good result. You need to think more about the consequences. Prometheus was a bit bewildered upon hearing this. Seeing him like this, Talon sighed. For this sincere and passionate god of foresight, Talon could be said to have watched him grow up, and it was hard not to worry about him a little more. He wanted to give Prometheus a hint to avoid his future tragic end, but in his heart, he knew that everything was already destined and could not be changed. But looking at such a sincere and passionate young man, in the deepest part of his heart, he couldn't help but ask himself. Is it really impossible to change? Perhaps, it was just that he was not strong enough yet. However, that day was still far away, so Talon didn't think about it anymore and just said to Prometheus, remember to tell Lord Oceanus to have him and his daughters be careful of the gods on the land. Prometheus did not understand why, but he still nodded. That's the end of part 2. Part 3 is coming soon.
Thanks for watching. Please subscribe and support our channel for more stories.